Dear colleagues, my apologies for the slight lateness. If we are all ready, we can begin this important hearing this afternoon. And I see that we are. So, good afternoon. And ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this hearing on preventing and countering radicalisation and violent extremism. We've been waiting for this hearing for some time. It's been scheduled for some time, and I'm really pleased at last we are having this hearing on such an important subject. Colleagues, with the recent terrorist attacks in several member states, the thousands of young Europeans who in recent years joined terrorist fighting in Syria and Iraq, the so-called foreign fighters, and the daily abundance of terrorist propaganda online, the topic of how to prevent and how to counter violent radicalisation is of course very high on our political agenda. As we all know, the European Parliament, under the leadership of Mrs Dati, adopted 1 year ago, that's on the 3rd of November, a resolution on the prevention of radicalisation and recruitment of European citizens by terrorist organisations. This hearing will take stock of what has happened since then, with recommendations made by the European Parliament in the resolution. It's also going to look in more detail by hearing from practitioners and experts dealing daily with these issues at the challenges relating to online radicalisation and to addressing radicalisation in our prisons, which was a particular interest in Mrs Dati's report, and to the judicial system. So we come to the first session, which is setting the scene, and I should remind colleagues that this session is web streamed, and I'm hoping more members will join us very shortly. So colleagues, the first session, we're going to look at the resolution in 2015 on radicalisation and what has been done since to take the Parliament's recommendation into account. I'm really delighted that in this first session we have, of course, Mrs Dati, who was the rapporteur of the resolution on radicalisation, but also I should welcome again, second time in 2 days, that we have Commissioner King with us, Commissioner on the Security Union. A warm welcome to him again. So first we give the floor to our rapporteur on the resolution on radicalisation, Mrs Dati, who will introduce the context of this resolution for 10 minutes. Mrs Dati, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, cher Claude. Monsieur le Commissaire, chers collègues, tout d'abord, je voulais remercier l'ensemble des participants à cette audition pour leur présence et en particulier aux intervenants qui se sont déplacés pour nous faire part de leurs expertises. Alors, il y a un an, quasiment jour pour jour, le Parlement européen adoptait un rapport sur la prévention de la radicalisation et le recrutement de citoyens européens par des organisations terroristes. Ce rapport a été adopté à une très large majorité, grâce à la bonne coopération, je dois le dire, avec mes collègues shadow rapporteurs, dans un contexte très brutal et très brutalisé à l'époque. Lancé ce rapport suite aux attaques de Charlie Hebdo et de l'hypercacher que nous avons connu à Paris en janvier 2015, le rapport a été adopté quelques jours après les attaques du 13 novembre 2015 à Paris, qui était responsable de 130 morts et des centaines de blessés. D'ailleurs, il y a encore des blessés et des victimes hospitalisées à ce jour suite à cet attentat. Nous, parlementaires européens, nous avons pris effectivement nos responsabilités en adoptant une série de mesures pour renforcer la sécurité des citoyens européens, pour faire en sorte que ces épreuves de traversée ne se reproduisent plus. Je dois faire remarquer qu'au niveau européen, on a moins connu de clivage partisan, voire politicien, entre nous pour adopter ces mesures qui allaient dans le bon sens et dans l'intérêt de la sécurité des citoyens européens. Le 25 novembre 2015, nous avons donc appelé la Commission européenne et les gouvernements des États membres à mettre en place une série de mesures fortes pour renforcer l'arsenal européen de lutte contre le terrorisme, notamment la suppression de contenus illégaux sur Internet, l'engagement de la responsabilité pénale des géants du net en cas de non-coopération, aussi la mise à l'écart de détenus considérés comme radicalisés dans les prisons européennes, ça fait son chemin dans beaucoup d'États membres d'ailleurs, le renforcement du rôle de l'éducation dans la prévention de la radicalisation, la mise en place de contrôles systématiques aux frontières extérieures de l'Union européenne, la lutte contre le financement du terrorisme et la transparence des financements extérieurs en provenance de certains pays du Golfe. Ça, c'est une mesure, d'ailleurs, avec Anna Gomes, on avait effectivement porté cette mesure, et qui a du mal à se mettre en place dans les États membres, et pour cause. Mais ça, c'est une mesure importante. Je peux vous dire qu'un an après, on se rend compte que ces attentats terroristes et les organisations terroristes, et notamment les associations ou les organisations qui appellent à la radicalisation, seraient moins nombreuses si on pouvait tarir ces sources de financement et qui, je dois le dire, viennent très clairement de certains pays du Golfe. Certaines de ces mesures proposées ont été mises en place, d'autres, malheureusement, sont encore à la traîne. Je pense notamment vis-à-vis du net, mais notre combat contre le terrorisme, et en particulier contre Daesh, est loin aujourd'hui d'être gagné, malgré les opérations que nous voyons et que nous connaissons, notamment à Mossoul ou à Raqqa en Irak. Mais la guerre contre Daesh n'est pas encore totalement gagnée. L'année 2016 nous l'a démontré douloureusement. Pour que cette barbarie ne se reproduise plus, nous devons effectivement nous interroger sur ce qu'il manque, sur ce que nous n'avons pas fait ou ce que nous devrions encore faire. Le problème, hélas, c'est que bien trop souvent, l'Union européenne réagit au lieu de prévenir. Nos travaux s'accélèrent systématiquement lorsqu'une tragédie survient, mais la lutte contre la radicalisation et le terrorisme, nous ne pouvons pas nous permettre de ralentir la cadence ou de réagir que suite à des attentats barbares. Alors la menace terroriste aujourd'hui qui pèse sur nos concitoyens et sur les États membres est extrêmement importante aujourd'hui et on nous dit à chaque fois que la menace est plus élevée que jamais chaque jour qui passe. Aucun de nous, aucun État membre ne peut se permettre de faire preuve de laxisme face à cette barbarie. Et notamment, nous ne pouvons pas faire preuve de faiblesse vis-à-vis de ces organisations terroristes qui pervertissent, il faut le reconnaître, notre jeunesse. C'est dans ces perspectives que l'audition d'aujourd'hui se propose de faire un point sur les succès que nous avons pu atteindre, si je puis dire succès, au cours de cette dernière année, mais aussi de faire un constat totalement lucide sur les combats qui nous restent à mener. Alors les experts aujourd'hui présents vont traiter effectivement des deux thèmes centraux du rapport, qui est la prévention de la radicalisation sur Internet et la prévention de la radicalisation en prison. Encore une fois, je voulais vous remercier. Moi, je trouve qu'il est important qu'on puisse travailler encore ensemble. Monsieur le commissaire, cher Julian, merci également de votre présence. Votre nomination, à laquelle je tenais d'ailleurs, et vous le savez, comme commissaire en charge de la sécurité, est un atout indéniable pour nous, parlementaires européens. Et je salue d'ailleurs votre disponibilité. Alors, la présidence du Conseil qui nous rejoindra en fin d'après-midi, leur présence est primordiale, même si je dois le dire, parfois, j'ai l'impression qu'elle est moins engagée, je vous le dis très directement, que nous pouvons l'être ou que la Commission peut l'être. Mais c'est comme ça qu'on se rend compte que dans certains États membres, il y a des mesures qui ne sont pas mises en œuvre. Alors, si l'action au niveau européen est indispensable pour prévenir la radicalisation des citoyens sur notre territoire, les États membres demeurent les premiers responsables de ce combat. Tous les États membres sont aujourd'hui concernés par la radicalisation et le djihadisme. Avant, on croyait toujours que c'était chez le voisin. Maintenant, tout le monde est impacté de la même manière. J'insiste vraiment sur ce point. Alors, pour toutes les présidences à venir du Conseil de l'Union européenne, la lutte contre le terrorisme et surtout et en particulier la prévention de la radicalisation, parce que la radicalisation est un phénomène dangereux qui ne conduit pas forcément au terrorisme, mais quoi qu'il arrive, c'est un débat que nous avions eu. Certains disaient oui, mais la radicalisation, comme les intégrismes, ne conduisent pas au terrorisme. D'accord, mais si on peut l'éviter, c'est encore mieux, parce qu'à un moment ou à un autre, ça dégénère de manière criminelle. Donc il est important, effectivement, que nous puissions le prévenir. Tous les experts le disent, les défaites militaires en Syrie et en Irak annoncent un risque croissant d'attaques terroristes en Europe, non seulement à cause des retours des combattants étrangers, mais également parce que les départs vers les zones de combat sont aujourd'hui plus compliqués. Nos mesures compliquent effectivement les départs en Syrie ou en Irak, ne serait-ce que la mise en place, par exemple, du PNR. Alors les individus radicalisés, certains regroupés et formant des cellules dormantes, ont pour instruction de propager finalement leur terreur en Europe. L'année 2016, d'ailleurs, nous l'a démontré systématiquement avec tous les attentats et les réseaux que nous démantelons tous les jours, les attentats qui sont déjoués. Le terrible attentat de Nice a révélé ce nouveau terrorisme qu'on peut qualifier de low cost. L'Allemagne a également connu plusieurs attaques à l'arme blanche cet été. Tout ça nous interpelle, nous incite à rester vigilants à tout moment. Les engagements que nous avons pris en tant que parlementaires européens seront tenus. Nous n'avons pas à rougir des avancées déjà actées au cours de cette dernière année. Nous avons adopté le PNR en avril dernier. La balle est désormais dans les camps des États membres qui doivent tout mettre en œuvre pour le rendre évidemment opérationnel. Et je peux dire que, par exemple, les attentats du 13 novembre dernier à Paris, on s'est rendu compte que pour certains qui s'étaient infiltrés en Europe, parce que les frontières extérieures de l'Union européenne n'étaient pas assez assez bien surveillé, il était facile évidemment de passer avec des faux papiers puisqu'il n'y a pas de biométrie partout. Et ça, c'est important aussi de le rappeler. C'est un cerveau de cet attentat du 13 novembre a pu passer allègrement par nos frontières extérieures de l'Union européenne sans aucun contrôle, en tous les cas sans qu'on puisse se rendre compte qu'il avait des faux papiers. Alors ma collègue Monica Hohlmeier a fait un travail remarquable pour finaliser rapidement la directive sur la lutte contre le terrorisme, qui reprend également plusieurs de nos engagements qu'on avait pris d'ailleurs dans mon rapport. D'autres des propositions sont encore en cours au Parlement, notamment le cas de la réforme des CRIS, ainsi que la modification du code Schengen pour des contrôles systématiques aux frontières extérieures. Mais moi, j'ai totalement confiance dans le travail de mes collègues et dans la volonté de chacun de faire aboutir ces dossiers dans les plus brefs délais. Sur les avancées dans les deux domaines que j'indiquais au départ, que ce soit celui d'Internet ou les prisons, c'est vrai que Twitter ou Google, il y a eu des réelles avancées qui ont été enregistrées, mais on peut le reconnaître aussi, c'est qu'on a mis aussi des menaces et des pressions très fortes pour que ça puisse avancer, parce qu'avant, je peux vous dire qu'ils disaient que chez eux, c'était circulé, il n'y avait rien à voir. Alors, dans la lutte contre la radicalisation en ligne, Twitter a notamment annoncé avoir suspendu 235 000 comptes entre février et août 2016. Ça démontre bien que quand ils veulent faire le boulot, ils le font. Cela demeure pourtant largement insuffisant, puisque Internet reste le moyen de communication privilégié des recruteurs. J'attends effectivement d'entendre les intervenants sur ce sujet. Je m'interroge également sur les actions conduites à la suite de la mise en place par la Commission du Forum européen sur Internet, lancé il y a un an par le commissaire Avramopoulos. J'aimerais savoir si les discussions avec les compagnies du net ont permis de mettre en œuvre des mesures concrètes. Finalement, que reste-t-il de ces échanges? Je sais que la deuxième réunion sera organisée le 8 décembre prochain, mais je pense que vous pourrez préciser sur ce sujet. Pour la radicalisation dans les prisons, je dois le dire, qu'on est quand même de plus en plus au point mort. Nous fermons totalement les yeux sur la situation explosive dans certaines prisons d'Europe. Et c'est vrai qu'en tant que shadow rapporteur pour le PPE sur les systèmes pénitentiaires, les conditions dans les prisons en Europe, nous avons envoyé un questionnaire à l'ensemble des ministres de la Justice et de l'Intérieur de l'Union européenne pour leur poser des questions très précises, notamment sur la radicalisation dans leurs prisons, au sein de leur pays. Et il ressort, puisque nous avons pratiquement l'ensemble des réponses des États membres, il ressort que très peu d'États ont décidé de faire face à ce problème. Peu de mesures concrètes ont d'ailleurs été mises en place. Donc, il est important que les prisons puissent être et que les États membres puissent engager des mesures sur la lutte contre la radicalisation en prison. On ne peut pas laisser ce fléau se propager en prison et laisser comme seul acteur face à cela nos administrations pénitentiaires qui sont totalement débordées par ces phénomènes de radicalisation. Il y a un dernier thème qui est celui de la déradicalisation. Alors, il y a des programmes, comme c'est le cas au Danemark ou aux Pays-Bas, qui marchent plutôt pas mal. En France, ça fait plus d'un an, voire 2 ans, que nous annonçons des programmes. Aucun n'a été mis en œuvre concrètement. On ne sait pas comment, d'ailleurs. Moi, j'aimerais qu'on puisse nous dire c'est quoi un programme de déradicalisation, quel est le concept, quels sont les acteurs de la déradicalisation, et aujourd'hui, quels sont les profils des individus qui sont concernés par ces programmes de déradicalisation, parce que je ne pense pas que les plus radicalisés aient envie simplement, spontanément, d'aller se déradicaliser. Moi, je ne crois, sur la déradicalisation, et notamment pour les plus dangereux, je ne crois qu'à la contrainte. Donc la déradicalisation sur le mode de l'adhésion, je ne crois pas que ce soit très efficace à ce stade. Alors, mesdames et messieurs, mes chers collègues, je ne serai pas plus longue, mais je pense que les échanges d'aujourd'hui permettront de redonner une dynamique à nos travaux européens en matière de lutte contre le terrorisme. Je voulais remercier notre président Claude Moraes dans notre commission, la commission Libé, sur ces sujets. Je trouve qu'on travaille tous en très bonne intelligence et à chaque fois nous avons des initiatives. Je voulais remercier Claude d'appuyer nos initiatives et de nous soutenir dans ces travaux et dans ce combat. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Dati. Before I turn to the Commissioner, I should mention, Mrs. Dati mentioned this critical issue of best practice in Member States, because what she's dealing with in this report is not a simple issue of legislative levers that we can pull either in the online area or in prisons. So this is an extremely complex area of different areas of practice, some of which are legislative, some of which are best practice, some of which are very much down to the member states. So she had to pull together a very complex set of levers. And I should mention that on the 5th we have Minister Casanova coming from France, and we should, whenever we have interior ministers, we should put to them what is the foreign fighter strategy, what is the prevent strategy, because you said in your introduction, Mrs. Dati, that we react too much but we don't prevent. And I think every interior minister should answer this question, because the unevenness between practice of countries is great. And so I think this is a key point to make. Secondly, before I come to the Commissioner, I know the Commission has read the recommendations of your report, but I think it's very useful that, because this is such a disparate area, that we now have something called at least a security union. We have a Commissioner in this one portfolio, because during the hearing, I think if I'm right, Sir Julian, you mentioned radicalisation is one of the key issues. So at least we now have some coherence in the portfolio. So I know you've read those recommendations, and I'm really glad you're here today to discuss it. So thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Well, no, thank you for the invitation. 1 year on from the adoption of this important resolution, which I think we've just had a very comprehensive review of. I'm going to focus my comments on the element of the fight against radicalisation, because I think that fight against radicalisation and the hate-fueled propaganda that feeds it is one of the defining challenges that we face, and one which we need to win if we're going to avoid a kind of post-truth dark age or repeating errors of the past. When Parliament agreed the resolution, tackling radicalisation linked to Islamic extremism was absolutely the top of our agenda. 1 year on, that remains the case. And although we are making some inroads, we're also learning that the radicalisation threat is even broader than we might have thought. With the far right on the rise, using national pride and identity as a channel to incite xenophobic hatred, intolerance and violence. There's obviously a place, and we all know this, for recognising the bravery and achievements of our ancestors. But history is also about learning the lessons, reading the signs and stopping the slide into extremism of whatever stripe. Tackling radicalisation is the first key defence. Last week in the United Kingdom, a man was convicted of the brutal murder of someone who used to work in this institution, Jo Cox, the MP for Batley and Spin. She was murdered by a radicalised far-right extremist because of her tolerant, outward-looking, and it has to be said, pro-EU views. Her murderer had fed his obsession through far-right propaganda available in print and on the web. So this isn't just about jihadists, however much we mustn't lose our focus on the jihadists. The far-right nationalists and separatists use the same techniques of selling a dream to manipulate and instrumentalise those who feel disadvantaged and alienated in our societies. The Commission fully shares the Parliament's assessment of the situation and supports all the initiatives that have been set out and reviewed by Ms Dati today. They're fully in line with the European Agenda on Security and what I see as my role trying to build an effective and sustainable security union. That's why the Commission has been active in the establishment and the funding of the Radicalisation Awareness Network, bringing together government and community actors to build a body of best practice and to fund the grassroots projects that can really make a difference. It's also why we've driven the creation of the EU Internet Forum with the leading internet industry players to make the takedown of extremist and terror content more effective and more rapid. The Radicalisation Awareness Network is, I think, a good example of soft measures delivering hard results. And the fight against radicalisation, this grassroots, long-term approach, is vital because we are engaged in a battle for hearts and minds, in particular of young and vulnerable people, something which local actors, rather than state authorities, are often better placed to do, not least because disaffection with the system is a common theme of those who become radicalised. None of that to say that states don't also have an important role to play. On the contrary, several member states have already set up their own initiatives. The network of prevent coordinators or contact points and the creation of a repository on preventive strategies, both presented during the RAN conference we held earlier this month, will provide an extra resource for policymakers and local practitioners. I'm glad to see that you've invited some of the chairs from the various RAN working groups to give you some first-hand insights later on this afternoon. The launch of RAN Young is particularly important, given that extremist recruiters focus on youth. We need to reach the people that the recruiters are targeting and offer them a better vision. It's not easy. And I want to highlight here, in particular, the plans to establish at the beginning of next year a network of role models for young people who would visit schools, sport and youth clubs to share their experience and hopefully to inspire others. The radicalisation threat posed by returning foreign fighters is not new, but it is an evolving threat that we need to take seriously as Ms Dati says, the situation on the ground in Iraq and Syria develops and the so-called caliphate begins to collapse. Some have already returned. Others will in the near future. Not all who return have the determination to cause us harm or to radicalise others. Some will return disillusioned and with a desire to return to normality. So identifying returnees and making this judgment call is a key challenge for our counter-radicalisation activities. The RAN high-level conference looked into the challenges practitioners are facing in this field. Interventions need to be tailored to the specific circumstances of the returnee, distinguishing between, for example, foreign terrorist fighters and non-combatants, including women and children. In line with the Terrorism Directive, which Ms Dati referred to, foreign terrorist fighters should face prosecution and imprisonment on return, subject to the judicial process. This in turn will pose challenges for the judicial system and will require targeted interventions in prisons as well as planning for the time after release. But beyond that, there are challenges of dealing with non-combatants, especially children, raised in a radicalised environment that we need to think about with particular care. The Commission will continue to support Member States in their efforts to prevent and counter radicalisation in prisons. It will also support exit programmes as well as reintegration and rehabilitation work. We encourage Member States to benefit fully from the Commission's support. Under the Justice Programme, the Commission is financing projects providing prison staff with the tools to detect early signs of radicalisation among detainees, risk assessment tools for the judiciary to determine the most appropriate measures, and training to prison management and staff, probation officers, prosecutors, prison chaplains and imams and counsellors. €6.5 million has been earmarked for 2015 and 16 to support such projects. Moreover, within the RAN and its Centre of Excellence, There are several other initiatives underway, and you'll hear more on those from some of those who are involved in the front line later on this afternoon. As we all know, terrorist and extremist organizations continue to abuse the internet to disseminate propaganda and radicalize vulnerable individuals. And here I would like to thank the Parliament for its resolution on EU strategic communication to counteract anti-EU propaganda by third parties, adopted last week. Reducing the supply of terrorist and extremist online content is one side of the coin. The other, of course, is the demand side. That's where we see a clear need to strengthen alternative voices through stronger civil society counter-narratives. We have to fight ideas with ideas, develop persuasive counter-narratives that offer a clear alternative vision. I think that's the most effective way of tapping into the same idealism which radicalisation is seeking to exploit. We have to target the people the recruiters are targeting and offer them a different, better path. And that means education, employment, inclusion. The Commission can help with the work that we are funding on counter-narratives through the RAN, through targeted use of Erasmus+, and the Youth Guarantee. The EU Internet Forum, launched last year, has produced some concrete results in terms of terrorist content removal. The momentum of this cooperation, including with national authorities and Europol, needs to be sustained and strengthened. As you said, on the 8th of December, Commissioner Avramopoulos and I will be hosting the second ministerial level meeting of the EU Internet Forum. We look forward to hearing from the companies how they will help ensure that material removed from one site is not simply uploaded onto another site. I hope a new joint referral platform will be announced as one of the main deliverables during the Internet Forum. We'll also discuss how to strengthen those alternative voices. The Commission has committed €10 million to equip civil society actors with the skills to develop their own positive alternative narratives. The so-called Civil Society Empowerment Programme will be rolled out in the coming months, and this work will be accompanied and supported by the RAN Centre of Excellence, and in particular, its dedicated working group on communications and narratives. Again, you'll hear a bit more about that later on this afternoon. In conclusion, we are making progress on countering radicalisation, but we need to be clear that this is a long-term project requiring months, indeed years, of patient work at grassroots level. Funding and facilitating this work through the RAN is a key EU contribution, which I'm very much committed to, as is the work we're doing with the key internet companies and Europol through the Internet Forum and the Internet Referral Unit. The challenge, the threat we face from radicalisation is constantly changing and evolving, and the current popular disaffection with mainstream politics in our member states means that the scope of our actions to counter it needs to keep pace with the evolving challenge. Extremism, in all its forms, must be the target of our action, and tolerance and inclusiveness the key elements of our response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And of course, you refer to internet referrals and one of the key aspects of Mrs. Stati's report, which is preventing and countering radicalisation online. And this is notoriously a complex, difficult area. Everyone thinks they know what it's about, but of course it's extremely complex and it's very important. So we hope in this session that we have 4 speakers who can unpick the complexity and look at least where we are. And I'm glad the Commissioner mentioned it in the way that he did, because as a Parliament we want to keep up to date with what the Commission is also doing in the Internet Referral Unit. And on this alone, where the hearing is useful to ensure that members who are interested in this keep up to date with what is happening in the Commission as well. So we begin immediately and proceed with our first panel of experts and practitioners. And the first one is Brittany Smith. And if all of you could please come to the podium. I was supposed to be doing that introduction as you came to the podium, but I got that wrong. So if you could please come to the podium. Brittany Smith, Stéphane Deguin, Adrienne Charmé, and Alexander Ritzman, please. Um, I'll introduce Brittany Smith as she's coming up. Can you stay? If you want to stay. You're Brittany. You're Brittany. You're Sharon. Okay, Brittany, are you ready? Okay, so let's begin, colleagues, with our first speaker, Brittany Smith. She's representing Google, and she's going to set out the challenges that Google faces in dealing with terrorist content, both in terms of the reactive and operational issues, as well as in terms of any proactive response that Google is taking to encourage positive speech online. And we're particularly interested in this, so we look forward to what you have to say. For 10 minutes maximum, please.
Thank you for inviting us to speak here and to meet with you on this important topic. We appreciate the opportunity to share more insight about our work in this space, including recent developments and announcements to expand our partnership and engagement on counterspeech. We are deeply troubled by violence and hatred in the world, and particularly by recent acts of terrorism and violent extremism. We want to be a part of the solution by upholding our responsibility to quickly review and remove content when necessary, and by investing in innovative counterspeech solutions. To support us in that effort, we regularly work with NGOs and government to better understand the issues and how we can be of help. We've been meeting regularly with leaders around the world, including here in Brussels, over the past several years to ensure open and constructive dialogue that leads to new ideas and to better collaboration. So today I want to outline what we've been doing in response to the extremist threat online. We have a two-pronged strategy, which is to identify and remove terrorist content and to support counter-narrative content, as I mentioned. Technology and innovation have emerged as key enablers of growth in the cultural and economic and education sectors. More content and information, including education materials, media content, artwork, and publications are produced and shared online today more than ever before, and it's led to an incredible diversity of content, much more than we had access to when we were just a couple of channels on our televisions. It also means that more people around the world think of themselves as creators, as artists, as authors. And however, the freedom to share whatever one chooses is not absolute. YouTube enables users to share the content that they create. They are diverse communities made up of millions of people, and while the vast majority of people that use these services use them for legitimate purposes, there will always be people who use them for ill will. And so to that end, Google has developed clear content policies and industry-leading flagging tools for our hosted services. We use a community policing model, which empowers users to report content that they find that violates our policies. If a YouTube user thinks that a video violates our guidelines, they can click a button to flag it, to review it. Our dedicated teams look to determine whether a video violates our policies by examining not only the content of the video, but also the context and intention with which it was uploaded. When our teams encounter a video that violates the community guidelines, we remove it globally and immediately. We can go to the next slide. We have a zero-tolerance policy toward terrorist content and robust processes in place to remove such videos. This includes official Daesh accounts, recruitment and training camp videos, videos that contain explicit calls for violence, and we strictly forbid terrorist-filmed beheading videos. We terminate the accounts of known terrorist groups, and we have a dedicated flag to identify content that promotes terrorism, which has been in place since 2008. Those flags are prioritized for review in our queue. In 2015 alone, we removed 92 million videos for violation of our policies through a mix of user flagging and spam detection technology. While we are vigilant and fast in removing terrorist content and hate speech, it's also worth noting that this actually represents a very small proportion of the content that violates our guidelines. These two violations only account for 1% of content that was removed in 2015 on our platform. We have a very active community that helps us monitor the content on our site. Our global community flags around 200,000 videos per day, and over 90 million people have flagged videos on YouTube since 2006. We have trained teams that are fluent in multiple languages who carefully review and evaluate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every single day of the year, and every time zone. They remove content that violates our terms and age-restrict content that might not be appropriate for all audiences. As YouTube continues to grow globally, we continue to scale our policy enforcement resources to meet the needs of our community. The number of flags per day, for example, is up 25% year on year. In addition to this, we've developed a Trusted Flagger program, which empowers certain users, NGOs, and government officials to flag videos in bulk. For example, the UK Home Office's Counterterrorism Internet Referral Unit is one of our most active members, as is the Europol Internet Referral Unit, which you'll hear from in a few moments. Flagged content, however, does not get automatically removed. YouTube is an important global platform for information and news, and our teams evaluate videos before taking action on them in order to protect content that has educational, documentary, scientific, and artistic purpose. We review flagged content regularly in order to determine that we understand the context in which a video was uploaded and that we incorporate that into our decision-making. Furthermore, we understand that various countries around the world have laws that impact content that might be on our services, so we've developed a process to facilitate requests to block content for particular jurisdictions based on local law. Content that violates local law can be reported via our legal removal site. We carefully review the material so that we can take appropriate action as quickly as possible. Requests from government pursuant to local law are included in our transparency report. Google launched its transparency report all the way back in 2010 in order to shed light on how laws and policies affect internet users and the flow of information online. We receive content removal requests in a variety of ways from all levels of government, whether that's a court order, a written request from national and local government agencies, and law enforcement professionals as well. In order to be able to properly evaluate a request, it must be made in writing, and it must be as specific as possible so that the content can be reviewed and removed in accordance with the law. Further to our commitments to transparency and free expression online, Google is a founding member of GNI, the Global Network Initiative, an international multi-stakeholder organization that brings together information and communications technology companies, civil society groups, including human rights and free expression groups, academics, and investors to forge a common approach to protecting and advancing free expression and privacy in the world. We can go to the next slide. As you can see, we work really hard to keep terrorist propaganda and recruitment off of YouTube, but we all face the same issue today, which is that content can be disseminated so quickly and easily online that it's practically impossible to suppress in all forms. We must consider the limitations of content removal as a strategy and a response. And while terrorists are attempting to use communications technology to amplify extremist speech, we need to think creatively and collaboratively about how these same technologies can be effectively marshaled to prevent and counter it. This is why at Google we invest so heavily in counter speech. We are focusing our efforts on helping to ensure that there is creative and compelling content that promotes healthy dialogue, empathy, tolerance, truth, understanding, and that this can drown out the content that promotes violence, hate, and fear. We want people in need of a community to be able to find hopeful messages online, not only harmful ones. So Google has hosted 7 counter-speech events here in Europe where we've collaborated on and led trainings and facilitation for hundreds of NGOs who work on de-radicalization. These trainings include content creation, instruction, best practices training, and clinics with our top YouTube stars, which is aimed at helping these groups attract much larger audiences and tell more compelling stories. This year, we want to build on that work by demonstrating the power of YouTube to drive positive social impact. On September 22nd, we introduced a new global program called YouTube Creators for Change, as well as new resources and grants that are dedicated to social change work. Given that over 70% of teens and millennials believe that YouTube creators change and shape culture, this program is focused on identifying ambassadors who will drive greater awareness of social issues and foster productive dialogue around these topics through the videos that they create. From combating hate speech to countering xenophobia and extremism to simply making the case for greater tolerance and empathy toward others, these creators are helping generate positive social change through a global fan base. The first YouTube Summit for Social Change gathered 150 creators, artists, nonprofit change makers from around the world at our YouTube space in London on the 22nd and 23rd of September for thought-provoking speaker program and series of workshops. Furthermore, to support and amplify these ambassadors and emerging creators, we've committed $1 million in equipment and production grants as part of this program. And Google.org, our philanthropic arm, has established a $2 million charitable fund to support nonprofits working on innovative solutions that promote inclusion and cross-cultural understanding. As a part of this campaign in France, for example, we launched a 100-day tour in partnership with Generation Numérique, Mobile Film Academy, and 12 famous YouTubers. We successfully trained 800 teens in 46 French and Belgian cities and helped them tell videos in their own version of Fraternité. 200 videos have already been created using the hashtag that we created for this campaign. So in sum, as I'm out of time, sorry, we are looking forward to learning from you, to hear your feedback and learn more about your challenges and how we can be a collaborative and supportive and creative partner in this effort. We are not complacent, and we will continue removing extremist content and deploying our technology in the fight against extremism and expanding our partnerships to support the work that all of you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I hope there will be questions, analysing the various actions you're talking about. It's interesting, and I hope, I know colleagues will want to analyse that. Thank you very much. Next we have Stéphane Deguin, who is heading the new EU Internet Referral Unit at Europol. We've heard a lot about this. We heard about it again from the Director of Europol yesterday. But we really need to think about what it's doing on radicalisation specifically. So you have the floor for up to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting us today to participate to this important discussion. Today, using some visual representation, I will present to you the main features of online terrorist propaganda, the EU Internet Referral Unit and its role in its prevention of online radicalisation, and the future trends that we are seeing in this field. Next slide, please. And the one afterwards, sorry. Thank you. So the unprecedented wave of attacks in Europe has brought into sharper focus the abuse and dramatic increase of internet-based communication by terrorist groups in the recent years. The aim is to recruit vulnerable youngsters and to transform a space of freedom into a catalyst for radicalisation. By space of freedom, I mean simply the internet. While it's not easy to provide a definition of the internet, but according to our values, it is a public good and a safe space to enact fundamental principles such as freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Next slide, please. While we can understand the internet with that definition, in the eyes of others, the internet is seen from a totally different angles. I'm not sure that you can read what's on the screen, but to summarize, for a terrorist group, since a lot of years already, the internet is an online battlefield. So one of the extremist propaganda insidious goals is to transform the internet into a tool to promote hatred and to call for violence. In fact, Daesh, as an example, growing global influence and continuous invasion of the cyberspace, marks, for the first time in history, the attempt by a terrorist group to dominate in both the real and the virtual world. It needs to be understood that the online presence of terrorist groups obey to a well-designated strategy. So they use elements of ideology, strategic marketing, and psychology to attract fighters and followers. And I would like to show you a video taking Daesh as an example, bearing in mind that it's without growing material. So Daesh propaganda appeals to the heart and soul of youngsters by making a radical distinction between believers and infidels. It tried to change the image of the young Muslim in traditional propaganda from a victim to a hero. So Daesh tries to attract supporters by creating an idealized version of itself, depicting the so-called caliphate as a state and showing the security and social services provided in the territories controlled by it. By doing this, it justifies violence. Then it aims as propagating fear and deterring its enemies by posting brutal videos of what they call victories. This is achieved through multilingual propaganda to ensure the widest reach. And more importantly, this effort is supported by compatriots from EU countries who address their peers in their native languages. So these messages are part of a wider call to any Muslim to migrate to the so-called caliphate, and should they fail to do what is presented by Daesh as their duty, the call is to perpetrate terrorist attacks against the population in their places of residence. This is a well-thought communication strategy where the most extremist ideologies are delivered through the means of the digital-savvy generation. There's recent evidence also of abuse of major social media platforms during terrorist attack, as we can see on this part of the video, in order to transform instantly murder into propaganda. So the success of terrorist propaganda does not rely only on the strength of its own media outlets, but also on the significant community of supporters and sympathizers. Jihadist groups, in particular, have shown a sophisticated understanding of how social media operates. The dissemination of the material is based on simultaneous replication of content across multiple platforms and multiple sharing by their community. So this tactic ensures that the content becomes viral very soon after its publication, and this creates great challenge for any countermeasure. Having this in mind, and given the size and the complexity of this phenomenon, a coordinated European response was needed. Next slide, please. The EU needs to ensure that Internet remains a public good, free of terrorism and violent extremist propaganda, while respecting the fundamental principle of freedom of speech. Next slide, please. So insofar, the Justice and Home Affairs Ministers asked Europol to implement the EU Internet Reform Unit with the following mandates. Again, I can summarize this mandate because I can understand it's quite written in small letters. Summarize is to reduce online accessibility to terrorist and violent extremist content, and on the other hand, to support member states' investigation. So following this political guidance and in close cooperation with member states and the Commission, the EU Internet Reform Unit was launched on the 1st of July 2015, so less than 4 months after the Minister's request. Next slide, please. The complexity of this task, from the technical and contextual point of view, called for the setup of a multidisciplinary unit. This unit allows for the integration of multiple and diverse knowledge and skills, ranging from experts in religiously inspired terrorism, translators, ICT developers, and law enforcement experts in the fight against terrorism, all of them supported by data protection professionals. Next slide, please. So the unit's strategic aim is to bridge the gap between prevention and investigation. Speaking about prevention, the unit approach is to focus on priority groups as requested by the EU member states. The activity of the EU IRU has been framed by the member states, and the group we are focusing on are Daesh, Al-Qaeda, and affiliates. Next slide, please. So the approach has 2 forms. The first one being attack-centric, where the unit focuses on the propaganda that is generated in the aftermath of an attack. Next click, please. As for example, in this case, for the attack after Nice, where 3 videos were published, so that's the approach that we take. Or it's content-centric, where the unit focuses on releases of major online propaganda, like Dabiq or Inspire. Next click, please. And identifies the network of sympathizers during its fast propagation online. Can you come back a slide, please? Thank you. So on the basis of this strategy, the content identified is searched throughout various hosting platforms in order to tackle both availability and outreach. The most important step in this process is manual. as each piece of content, messages, and account is cautiously assessed against Europol mandate. So the aim is to draw an analytical picture which will support member states' investigation and reduce online accessibility of the content. This action is pursued through the referral process. The EU-IIU informs the online service providers about the material hosted on their platform, material that is potentially in breach of their terms and conditions, and this is a voluntary-based process, and it is ultimately for the companies to decide whether or not they want to keep this content on their server. Within 16 months of activity, the EU-IIU has manually assessed more than 17,000 pieces of online extremist content. The next slide, please. Thank you. Over 91 platforms in 11 different languages. In more than 87% of the cases, the online service provider addressed decided to remove the content from their platform. Next slide, please. If we think about the future, the terrorist represents one of the most serious threats of the security of the EU, so in the IIU, in the ECTC, this is quite of the main priorities that we are focusing on in terms of this kind of propaganda. So we will continue to this end to engage with the internet companies, the academia and the civil society partners in order to address future challenges. We will concentrate on the further shifts to new platforms. We have seen that the diversity of choice of platform is growing, and new platform are set up every second month in order to provide a possible abuse for this group. We will monitor development of jihadi online scene in Europe's neighborhoods with a priority. And we'll focus referral activities on content aimed at threatening Europe. We will also continue to monitor the increased technical capabilities and expertise of violent jihadist groups because technology plays a huge role in this field. The EU tried to show that collectively we are capable of finding innovative solutions and adapting EU response to evolving threats. And I look forward to hearing your views and to answer to your questions. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. And again, I hope there will be questions after that very professional presentation. Thank you very much. And we move straight to the issue of what are the fundamental rights implications of what we've just heard, both from Google and from the EU Internet Referral Unit. And here to answer that question is Adrienne Charmé, who's representing the NGO Quadrature du Net. And she will look at this delicate balance between fundamental rights and the issue of taking content down from online. The floor is yours.
Bonjour, merci de m'avoir invité à venir parler. En tant que représentante d'une association de défense des droits fondamentaux, je vais porter un regard plus critique sur l'effet et l'impact des politiques et des législations destinées à lutter contre la radicalisation en ligne. Venant d'une association française, nous avons en plus l'expérience de plusieurs années de législation portant sur la question de la lutte contre le terrorisme et la radicalisation en ligne, puisque plusieurs lois depuis 2014 ont abordé ces sujets en France. Je vais évoquer principalement la question du blocage de sites Internet et de la responsabilité des hébergeurs de contenu sur Internet, mais aussi quelques mesures de surveillance qui peuvent amener à des atteintes aux droits fondamentaux. Pour situer un peu l'état d'esprit dans lequel je vais parler, M. Duguin a juste dit à l'instant que Internet était vu comme un champ de bataille pour le djihad, ce qui est probablement une façon très juste de montrer les choses. Mais il ne faut pas oublier que c'est un champ de bataille qui est peuplé de civils non seulement innocents, mais aussi qui ne sont pas concernés par ce conflit. Ces civils, ce sont vous, moi et l'immense majorité des internautes. Donc, dans la lutte contre les contenus radicaux et la radicalisation, la première tentation est celle de la censure, et notamment la censure de comptes et de contenus sur les réseaux sociaux. Pour rappeler le cadre juridique actuel de la responsabilité des fournisseurs de contenu tels que Google, Facebook, Twitter et autres plateformes, ces plateformes ont une obligation de retrait des contenus lorsqu'ils sont manifestement illicites et lorsqu'ils ont été signalés, ce qui peut permettre de retirer normalement assez facilement un certain nombre de contenus illicites. Mais cela demande aux hébergeurs une capacité de qualification juridique très fine et très délicate, notamment dans un contexte de radicalisation et de propagande. Pour rappeler un peu, la notion de terrorisme est déjà relativement mal définie et porteuse historiquement de biais politiques. Je ne veux pas dire par là que le djihad est que le djihadisme serait quelque chose de justifiable, mais simplement qu'historiquement, la question du terrorisme est sensible. Deuxième point, l'apologie et la glorification du terrorisme sont également des notions floues avec une qualification juridique qui peut être délicate. Enfin, la notion de radicalisation et les questions de propagande sont, là encore, extrêmement subjectives. Et aujourd'hui, la différence entre radicalisation, endoctrinement ou vision politique extrêmement stricte peut être assez facilement débattue. Donc le risque de fermeture ou de censure de compte ou de contenu et le risque de débordement est réel. On a vu régulièrement sur Twitter et sur Facebook notamment des comptes de journalistes ou d'analystes, de personnes qui font une veille extrêmement utile sur les questions de djihadisme, fermés sans aucune explication et sans aucun recours, autre que les connexions personnelles de ces analystes et journalistes avec des personnes travaillant pour ces plateformes ou la pression de gros comptes de journalistes ou de personnes influentes sur les réseaux sociaux pour pouvoir réouvrir ces comptes, ce qui pose un réel problème de censure sans recours. De la même façon, ça pousse, et le reste des mesures dont je vais parler va aussi dans ce sens, à une mise sous le manteau de la propagande et à une évolution du recrutement et de la propagande par des réseaux de plus en plus fermés et moins accessibles au public, ce qui peut être bien pour empêcher l'accès, mais ce qui est mauvais pour lutter et pour remonter les réseaux de djihadistes. Donc, quoi qu'il en coûte, et même si pour cela nous pensons qu'il peut être nécessaire d'adapter le contexte judiciaire pour pouvoir accélérer les prises de décision. Pour lutter contre la propagande radicale, comme pour les autres types de contenus illicites, nous pensons qu'il faut absolument revenir à une réponse judiciaire et non pas forcer par la pression politique les plateformes diverses à accentuer leur travail de censure. Puisque la réponse judiciaire non seulement agit plus en profondeur sur les réseaux de propagande, mais également peut décider au cas par cas, avec le travail des services de police et de renseignement, de décider de surveiller plutôt que de fermer une source de propagande si la surveillance est plus utile à long terme que la fermeture. On sait que les décisions de fermeture massive de comptes, notamment sur Twitter, n'ont pas forcément été immédiatement une bonne chose pour les services de police et de renseignement. Deuxième point, fournir un moyen très clair pour les personnes censurées de faire valoir leurs droits, puisque les censures abusives sont fréquentes, puisqu'en face de la propagande, on a plus que jamais besoin de garantir les libertés, et notamment la liberté d'information et d'expression. C'est en cela que nous sommes assez critiques vis-à-vis de l'Internet Forum dont il a été question, qui pose ses règles et ses objectifs en dehors du droit commun et sous la pression du politique. Deuxième point, le blocage de l'accès aux sites faisant l'apologie du terrorisme. C'est une mesure qui a été adoptée en France dans le cadre de la loi antiterroriste de novembre 2014 et qui est proposée pour être étendue dans la directive européenne sur le terrorisme actuellement en vote ici. Ce blocage se fait en France à la demande des services du ministère de l'Intérieur, de la police, et se double d'un déréférencement des moteurs de recherche pour qu'on ne puisse plus trouver ces sites notamment sur Google. Ce blocage renvoie, lorsqu'on tente de se connecter à un site bloqué, vers une page du ministère de l'Intérieur qui, au passage, collecte l'intégralité des adresses IP des ordinateurs qui se connectent sur ces sites, ce qui est quand même quelque chose de sensible. Il n'y a pas de liste accessible des sites qui sont bloqués. et il n'y a quasiment pas de recours, à part a posteriori, par le biais du juge administratif qui est donc censé apprécier le bien fondé de ce blocage. Ce blocage et ces mesures de blocage sont globalement totalement inadaptées à la réalité de la propagande, puisque c'est une réponse actuelle à une réalité qui n'a plus cours, c'est-à-dire qu'il n'y a presque plus de sites exclusivement dédiés à la propagande djihadiste. En France, il y a environ une cinquantaine de sites qui sont bloqués par le ministère de l'Intérieur, selon ce que nous dit le gouvernement, c'est-à-dire que c'est ridicule par rapport à la masse de contenu extrémiste qui circule. Il n'y a aucune finesse dans ces blocages, il faut bloquer l'intégralité du nom de domaine, et puis le risque de surblocage ou d'erreur de blocage est assez important. Nous l'avions dénoncé dès 2014 et il y a à peine un mois, en France, le fournisseur d'accès Internet Orange s'est trompé dans sa liste de blocage et a par exemple bloqué pendant toute une matinée l'intégralité de Google et de Wikipédia en France, comme si c'était des sites faisant l'apologie du terrorisme. Et pour le citoyen, il n'y a aucune manière de pouvoir s'opposer à ce blocage. Dernier point sur ce blocage, cela habitue dangereusement la population à une censure sans juge qui devrait nous faire réfléchir sur le type de réponse démocratique qu'on voudrait donner au risque de radicalisation. Dernier point, la pénalisation de la consultation de sites faisant l'apologie du terrorisme, qui est une mesure qui a également été adoptée en France et dont je sais qu'elle a été évoquée ici déjà. C'est une mesure qui a été introduite dans le droit français en juin 2016, après plusieurs propositions depuis 2012 venant de la gauche comme de la droite au Parlement français. Cette mesure, pour être appliquée, nécessiterait une surveillance générale des connexions des citoyens sur Internet, si on veut l'appliquer réellement et rechercher les infractions. En réalité, aujourd'hui, elle est utilisée pour mettre de côté, pour mettre en prison, mettre en détention des individus qu'on suspecte sans preuve tangible de radicalisation ou de dangerosité pour la suite. Il y a eu environ une vingtaine de condamnations de ce type en France depuis le mois de juin. Concrètement, cela abaisse le niveau à partir duquel on devient terroriste. C'est utilisé uniquement parce qu'on ne sait pas quoi faire d'autre contre ces personnes radicalisées. Cela présuppose les intentions des internautes. On présuppose qu'aller consulter un site faisant l'apologie du terrorisme fait de vous un terroriste. Et cela peut mener à des mises en cause infondées, soit parce que la personne donc est simplement en recherche d'informations, soit parce que les sites sont mal évalués. Il y a quelques jours, lors d'un procès en France, un des principaux sites universitaires de documentation sur le discours djihadiste, qui s'appelle djihadologie.net, a été considéré comme un site terroriste et a servi à faire condamner une personne. Donc on voit arriver de plus en plus au motif de la lutte contre la propagande et l'embrigadement, lutte parfaitement légitime, une accélération de la surveillance et de la censure au niveau européen, sans aucune évaluation de l'impact à long terme de ces mesures sur l'exercice des droits fondamentaux. La directive de lutte contre le terrorisme, qui est actuellement en vote ici, n'a même pas d'étude d'impact. Donc, l'état de santé démocratique de l'Europe dans quelques années, risque d'être fortement impacté par ces mesures. Contre tout cela, et je termine avec ça, à la Quadrature du Net, nous avons lancé des actions contre ces différentes lois, notamment françaises, de censure auprès de la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme et de la Cour de justice de l'Union européenne, mais tout cela sera long et fait évidemment a posteriori. C'est pour ça que au Parlement européen qui a à voter sur les questions de radicalisation, nous proposons et nous incitons à travailler prioritairement sur le contre-discours, à sauvegarder absolument l'équilibre et le socle des droits et des recours, et à travailler beaucoup plus en profondeur sur les causes de l'attirance pour le terrorisme et la violence. Merci.
Thank you very much. And the final speaker in this really interesting panel is Alexander Ritzman. From RAN, who's the leader of the Communication and Narratives Working Group. And I've heard him speak before recently. It was you didn't see me, but it was in Washington. So I've heard your presentation. But in particular, trying to bring together this whole conundrum of what you take off online and how you preserve freedom and how we're doing on this. some context would be really good to hear from the RAN point of view. You have the floor for up to 10 minutes. Thank you, Alexander.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to share some insights from the Radicalization Awareness Network. Before I do so, we've all been talking about the empowerment of civil society. I would like to talk briefly about my day job. As the director of the European Foundation for Democracy, we work on prevention of radicalization, countering of violent extremism by empowering pro-European voices in vulnerable communities. And our objective is to increase the resilience of vulnerable communities and therefore foster a free and safe Europe. For example, we produced a practitioner's guide from teachers for teachers to foster integration and prevent radicalization. We do workshops with Syrian refugees on capacity building, and we're currently producing, and this connects to my presentation, a practitioner's guide on effective alternative and counter narratives. So now I think the presentation went ahead a little bit. Can we go back one slide, please? Yeah, because now the presentation of the RAN starts. As you've heard about the RAN, I'm very sure it's a network of frontline and grassroots practitioners from around Europe who work daily with people who have already been radicalized or who are vulnerable to radicalization. Practitioners include police and prison authorities, teachers, youth workers, civil society representatives like myself, local authorities, representatives, healthcare professionals. It's a big mix of all kinds of backgrounds, professional backgrounds. Next slide, please. In RAN working groups, we have these frontline practitioners, and they share their knowledge and their first-hand experience with one another. They peer review each other's practices, and therefore RAN is also a platform for researchers and policymakers. Next slide, please. You see on the screen the RAN collection. It's accessible on the web. You can really read into a lot of practices that have been reviewed, where you can look into good practices that might be applicable in some local context. It's very hard to transfer lessons learned from one country to another or from one local situation to another, but it is hard work, but the RAN is doing it, and it's, I think, very important in the context that has been mentioned earlier. Communication and narratives are key to preventing and countering radicalization. Terrorist groups are capitalizing on technology to extend the reach of their narratives and to recruit people. We've heard this from other colleagues here on the panel. The working group on communication and narratives focuses on delivery of both on and offline communication that offers either positive alternatives or that counters extremist propaganda. I think we can go to the next slide. This can stay on if you like. The working group gathers insights on the content of these narratives, its target audiences, the messages that are being used, the ways of dissemination, with the aim of supporting civil society to produce the mentioned alternative and counter narratives in a more effective way. Now, some will ask, do alternative and counter narratives really work? And let me start with, how does propaganda work in the first place? We all live in our communication bubbles, in our echo chambers. We are largely immune to outside information that is challenging our worldviews. However, people in personal crisis might look for a new direction, for support to make sense of their situation, their emotions, and to redirect guilt. Propaganda can therefore be effective when people are curious what else is out there, or in doubt that a formerly perceived truth is still the right thing to do, to believe. Therefore, counter and alternative narrative campaigns can work if they are specifically directed at a well-researched and clearly identified target audience that is either curious about extremist content, maybe because there's a lot of reporting in the media, maybe it's being described as the biggest challenge of our century, whatever it is, people get curious, or if they are in doubt that a once accepted extremist worldview is still working out for them. This needs to be followed by targeted personal online interventions. This is what the bad guys do. If you are on Facebook or on another platform and you like something, you share something, you comment on something, you will receive an email by someone saying, how are you? Let's talk. What is your issue? Do you want to seek help or anything? This is how the bad guys approach it, and we need to do the same on the other side. Campaigns highlighting flaws, lies, and contradictions can make people in the mentioned conditions rethink and are a first important step for change. Promoting role models and examples for positive action are important to offer new directions. And then, in addition, one-to-one digital interventions, basically online social work, is a necessary follow-up to first satisfy the individual's need for attention and action, and to evaluate if the campaign and the intervention have had any impact. To sum up, yes, counter and alternative narrative campaigns can work if done properly. What are the next steps? What should be done? The civil society must be empowered, particularly small NGOs or even engaged individuals. How? A network of pro-democratic, pro-European activists should be created, supported, and maintained. This could be different NGOs, or it could be three mothers from Molenbeek with an iPad, people who have credibility, who have a message, who are engaged, who are emotional. The role of government here is to help facilitate trainings and to build capacity, provide easy access to funds, but governments should not become involved directly. It's important in this context to have a transparent vetting process and how to select the right partners. You have to make sure that they promote a pluralistic, liberal, democratic society. Also, you need to have a strong evaluation component from the start to be able to select and promote good practices at later stages. The upcoming EU Internet Forum that has been mentioned by the Commissioner King and the following Empowering Civil Society program could be this opportunity to create such a network of activists and engaged citizens who promote European values and counter propaganda. To conclude, preventing violent extremism and fostering community resilience is being considered a soft approach, but it can deliver hard and tangible results. I would like to re-emphasize that the importance of a robust vetting process on selecting the right partners for empowering individuals and groups in local communities and training and educating vulnerable youth. There is a discussion going on if Salafists should not be promoted and funded to counter the so-called Islamic State's propaganda, for example. So, same ideology, one side is non-violent, the other is violent. The same could be applied for the right wing, that you have right-wing extremist parties getting funding for de-radicalization of neo-Nazis. So I consider this very critical, this point. We should fund and support people who promote pluralism and the Europe that we all want. And it is very important for small NGOs particularly to have easier access to funding. This is very essential. People who have 2 or 3 full-time staff cannot dedicate one position for several months to go through an EU funding process. There need to be other ways to fund the voices that you want to be heard, that you want to be promoted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we immediately open it up to the members who wish to ask questions. And the first one is I think your shadow on the resolution, Ana Gomez, beginning with Ana Gomez.
Thank you so much. I want to ask you, in particular, Mr. Dugan and Mr. Ritzman, if you believe that what our governments have been making in terms of, indeed, bringing this fight for counter-propaganda, a counter-narrative to the grassroots. Because, as you said, I mean, we cannot win this battle without involving the activists, the grassroots. And this may be people in the Muslim communities. We will not win this fight against so-called jihadism without involving our Muslim communities, or other people who counter, for instance, right-wing violence, Nazi propaganda. I don't think that enough has been done, because from what I see, these programs have been very little, very few, very late, and probably not with best practice, but sometimes even spreading bad practices, although there are some good practices. I can't imagine that this can be done without involving municipalities, local authorities, schools, families, support to the families. They are crucial in early detection of people in the path of radicalization. And how many cities throughout Europe, namely cities with a majority of, or with a sizable migrant communities and Muslim communities, have actually been the subject of such programs? And then I think that indeed there's another question that really is at the heart of that, because I think that the policies of exclusion have not stopped. The austerity policies in many of our countries have meant exclusion, and so we are feeding, especially in communities of coming from the migration, we are feeding the factors for radicalization. So how can we be addressing the root causes? And even more so, for instance, in particular, now with the situation with the inflow of refugees, and I'm not at all sharing the view that this is a big danger, but the fact that that our governments do not care for proper relocation, resettlement of refugees, and leave them, including unaccompanied minors, to be feeding all sorts of criminal recruitment, including terrorist recruitment, is absolutely criminal. And our governments cannot give us the security excuse when in the end, in the way they have not been addressing the problems of refugees, is actually meaning handing lots of new people into the hands of criminals, including of terrorists and extreme violent people.
Thank you very much, Anna. It would actually be good to get from all speakers, from their own perspective, what their ideas of the perceived scale of the problem and their perception of how big the solutions are, i.e., what kind of level of solution you're providing. So, if it's the EU Internet Referral Unit, what currently Europol actually thinks is the scale of the problem, and where you honestly feel you are, I mean, within reason, you may not want to reveal that, but and it's the same with Google, it's the same with the RAN network, because this is something without end. I mean, but there is no kind of perspective. Most MEPs don't have a perspective on this. So I just personally would like some pinning down of exactly, I mean, it could be a smaller issue than we think, but some idea of perspective would be interesting as well from your different views. Next is Mr. Lopez Aguilar, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to address a question straightforward. The first goes to Mrs. Brittany Smith. You've testified approach and the contribution that Google secures in order to face the magnitude of the problem. I would like to get to know, according to your experience, which is the added value of the European scale. Because, for one thing, when we refer to the extent, to the length of the problem in the net, we used to refer to the giants, to the so-called giants in the net, being number one Google. What to do? I mean, when you're harassed, when you're incited to hatred or violence through an instrument which is available in the net, what can you do about it? You need to resort to Google. But according to your experience, what is the added value that can be secured, that can be contributed by the European scale of the problem, by the European institutions, particularly by the European response. Because if it's out of range for member states, nation states, as we used to call them, is it at the range, at least, of the European scale, of the European level of response? Does it mean something in practical terms to go European when facing this kind of problem, according to your experience? And to Mr. Ritzman, the question to you is, we used to refer to the let's put it this way, high-intensity violence in the net, incitement to high-intensity violence. Number one example, jihadism, the so-called radicalisation, which is tantamount to jihadism. But there is low-intensity violence in the net. Not only we are socializing violence through, let's say, the prison system or through hatred speech in the net. How about low-intensity violence, for instance, around the world of sports? We're seeing more and more violence being conducted through sports contests and celebrations. And there are lots of fans and fan clubs which are hating each other and fighting each other most violently. And when we banalize this type of violence, or school gangs harassing or fighting each other, when we are banalizing this kind of low-intensity violence, it's for good reason. We see that in the net. What is your analysis according to all of the elements that are at your disposal? What's your analysis of how low-intensity violence relates to high-intensity violence? Thank you very much,
Joanne. And Mrs. Sippel, please, Brigitte.
Thank you very much. First of all, I really appreciate the approach that very different actors are cooperating to fight extremism and hate speech. But I would like to ask some concrete questions. To Mrs. Smith from Google, I understood that, for example, you are looking for pages from known terrorist organizations or known terrorists. So the one question would be, who is giving you the information on those organizations and persons? And second, I understood that you are blocking those pages. Maybe I misunderstood. If this is really the case, I would like to ask, why are you blocking and not deleting those pages? Another question is, in that context, you also mentioned your own policies, and yet you are working on things that are not in line with your policies. So could you give, beyond terrorism, some examples what your policies are and what you're doing? Because what I would like to see, of course, is that content that clearly is illegal or unlawful is deleted. I'm not in favor of deleting or blocking things that might not be nice, but are not unlawful. Because on those things, I think it's not good just to delete them, but we do need a democratic and public debate. Having said this, I would like to switch to Mr. Ritzman, because what I understood is that it's necessary in countering hate speech and preventing radicalization, first to learn once again what it means to meet each other with respect. So one very fundamental thing is first to listen to people, even if we do not like what they say, and only then try to find out where is it coming from that they are saying this. And I think there is a link between what we can do in school and what we can do in so-called social media when we talk about counterbalancing things. And the last question is going to Mr. Charmet. When you mentioned some examples, maybe I'm just looking on a page promoting terrorism. Is it really happening that then I might run danger to be sanctioned in one or the other way? And I really ask this because for many people working with young people, maybe for them it's necessary to have a look on those hateful speeches in the internet to know what young people are looking upon. And I'm referring to that because we have some examples on terrorist lists where we found people that are not terrorists, so we have to be very careful over that. So I will stop here with some remarks and questions.
Thank you, Birgit. And Mr. Dupré, Gerard, please.
Merci, Président. Moi aussi, comme Madame Sippel, je voudrais me réjouir de la manière dont nous abordons un sujet qui, par nature, est difficile, puisqu'il s'agit de trouver un juste équilibre entre le respect des libertés fondamentales et les besoins de protection et, si possible, de prévention contre des actes ignobles et criminels. Je voudrais aussi regretter, à moins qu'elle ne soit là et que je ne l'ai pas vu, le départ de la Commission. Y a-t-il quelqu'un de la Commission ici? On discute d'un sujet. Il y avait un commissaire qui était là tout à l'heure.
Unfortunately, there was a commissioner present. He has now left.
Oui.
I shall take careful notes, Gerard, and communicate them to Commissioner King on your behalf. I know we can never have a commissioner waiting till the end. I'll try my best next time.
Bien. Si vous le permettez, je voudrais adresser quelques questions à Madame Charmet, dont l'exposé m'a interpellé. Si j'ai bien compris, elle critique fondamentalement le fait que certaines des choses qui se font maintenant sous le couvert des lois spéciales en France ou ailleurs seraient assez arbitraires, notamment en ce qui concerne la fermeture des comptes, par exemple. Bien. Quelqu'un a dit, ou en tout cas c'est une statistique que j'ai eue, qu'entre février et août 2016, il y a 230 000 comptes Twitter qui ont été fermés. Madame, est-ce que vous voulez sérieusement qu'il y ait eu une décision judiciaire sur ces 230 000 cas? Est-ce que c'est ça que vous voulez dire? Bien. Deux, vous dites que les notions de criminalisation, de consultation des sites sont des choses contestables. Je suis d'accord avec vous. Mais nous avons introduit en Belgique, par exemple, des peines pour les personnes qui consultent des sites pédopornographiques. Ça nous a permis de déceler des pédophiles et ça nous a permis de les condamner. Et jusqu'à présent, à ma connaissance, il n'y a pas eu un seul innocent qui a été victime d'un procès et qui aurait été condamné. Est-ce que vous ne pensez pas que cette logique-là est aussi à l'œuvre dans le domaine de la lutte contre le terrorisme et contre la radicalisation? Et je pourrais prendre aussi ce que vous avez dit sur l'apologie du terrorisme. En fait, je pense que vous faites l'hypothèse que l'essentiel des mesures pour lesquelles nous plaidons et que nous prenons sont des mesures relativement arbitraires qui vont faire des victimes. Les victimes, pour l'instant, c'est les victimes du terrorisme. Et donc, dès lors que nous mettons en place des dispositifs qui peuvent avoir pour effet d'empêcher un certain nombre de gens de passer à l'acte, en les prenant le plus tôt possible dans leur dessein criminel, je pense que nous faisons une œuvre sage et que nous ne méprisons pas les libertés individuelles, puisque toute personne qui serait injustement considérée comme potentiellement dangereuse aura toujours la possibilité de se défendre et d'être exonérée de toute culpabilité par les juridictions. Et il y a beaucoup plus de cas, à ma connaissance maintenant, de gens qui sont condamnés justement que d'innocents qui sont victimes de choses arbitraires. Et je viens au problème des providers, puisque nous sommes toujours sur la radicalisation online. Online, c'est le sujet du... Mon expérience personnelle dans cette manière-là est que les providers, au départ, n'ont pas pris très au sérieux la problématique du terrorisme. Il a fallu qu'on leur rappelle, il a fallu qu'on leur dise que c'était un sujet important, il a fallu que l'on fasse pression sur eux. Et si j'ai un reproche à faire, notamment à l'approche de la Commission et des providers maintenant, c'est qu'on a l'impression qu'il faut leur demander des choses. Il y a des choses qui pourraient paraître évidentes pour des citoyens de bonne foi, respectueux des lois des libertés fondamentales. Quand il y a des choses qui sont choquantes, on ne devrait pas leur demander. Ils devraient spontanément proposer un certain nombre d'actes. Vous avez eu peur aussi du forum. J'ai entendu Mme Charme, vous avez peur de beaucoup de choses, en disant que vous craignez. Mais moi, je n'ai pas peur de ce forum. Je trouve simplement qu'il y a quelque chose de gênant en ce que les providers entre eux ne se mettent pas d'accord suffisamment rapidement sur un certain nombre de bonnes pratiques et ne les mettent pas en œuvre sans qu'on doive les solliciter. Ça me gêne. Je ne demande pas des dispositifs répressifs, je ne dis pas que je vais les traduire demain devant les juridictions, que je vais les fermer, que je vais leur coller des amendes. Je dis, j'attends quand même à ce qu'il y ait une coopération loyale entre eux pour éviter que des contenus qui sont, je dirais, par essence criminels, ne puissent pas rester sur les sites, que les sites soient fermés ou que l'accès soit bloqué. Voilà les questions et les réflexions que je voulais faire à ce stade, Président, avec mon introduction un peu intempestive sur la Commission.
Of course. Thank you, Gerard. Mrs. Winberg.
Tack, herr ordförande. Och jag vill börja med att tacka för informationen. Jag kan väl säga att det är väl bra med det här att man granskar allting som läggs upp på nätet. Det är jätteintressant att se liksom att man sitter 24 timmar per dygn, 365 dagar om året och bevakar. Det är jättebra. Det känns i alla fall lite som en trygghet. Vi ska ju senare här också höra hur man arbetar i fängelserna med det här problemet. Men en fråga jag har, hur jobbar man i moskéerna för att förebygga radikalisering där? Vi hörde ju nämnt tidigare här om att man har något samarbete med imamer, men gärna lite mer om det skulle jag vilja veta, för det är ofta där också det sker. Vi har slutat att fråga oss om det kommer att hända ett nytt terrordåd. Nu undrar vi tyvärr när det kommer att ske. Det har blivit så vanligt och det är skrämmande. Jag tittar bara som mitt land Sverige. Det är ett land som per capita har flest IS-krigare. Där många av dem också kommer tillbaka till Sverige efter att ha krigat. Tyvärr vill jag säga. För de är nog av den farliga sorten som förmodligen inte går att avradikalisera. Så det jag ställer mig frågan är, varför inte införa hårdare och avskräckande straff? Ta ifrån dem deras medborgarskap. Jag menar, har de åkt ut och mördat människor, våldtagit människor, så tycker inte jag de har rätten att beträda våra medlemsstater. Så att varför har ni inte det i tankarna att det kanske vore bra att avskräcka dem genom att ta ifrån dem deras medborgarskap och införa hårdare straff? Det hade jag gärna sett. Ja, det var det jag hade. Tack.
And Mrs. Grappini, please.
Mulțumesc mult, domnule președinte. Și eu vreau să mulțumesc și să apreciez foarte mult. E o discuție extrem de importantă. Aș vrea să completați aceste informații cu eventualele răspunsuri. Vorbim de rețelele de socializare, dar nu am auzit în prezentarea dumneavoastră ce se întâmplă cu clonarea conturilor. Foarte frecvent în țara mea și sunt sesizată că mulți îmi spun, vezi, nu e contul meu, a fost clonat. În felul acesta, sub numele unor oameni de bună credință, pot apărea puse mesaje care nu le aparțin. Apoi, apar modificări de mesaje și trebuie să recunosc că am avut situații în care am reclamat la Google personal și nu au fost luate măsuri. Pur și simplu am reclamat la Google niște mesaje care erau porno și care nu trebuiau să apară pe pagina mea, însă nu s-a întâmplat nimic. S-a spus aici că, în general, sunt racolați pe rețelele de socializare oamenii supărați, oamenii care au probleme și că ar trebui și noi să folosim, dar sigur, invers metoda, să luăm cumva acești oameni și să-i scoatem din starea în care sunt pentru a nu se duce în extremă, să nu se radicalizeze, să nu devină violenți. Ați gândit ceva concret, dumneavoastră cred că ați spus, ați gândit ceva concret, un program, pentru că colega mea vorbea de educație. Eu vorbesc de faptul că de la grădiniță începând, sau toate magazinele pline de jucării sunt de pistoale, de puști, de tot felul de armament și media de asemenea, filmele sunt violente și toate lucrurile acestea poate să ducă la o cale greșită a unor copii și a unor tineri. V-ați gândit la ceva concret, un program, cum să facem ca acești oameni supărați, pe lângă problemele sociale, unde ar trebui să intervenim și sigur acele necesități firește ale oamenilor să fie rezolvate,
cum am putea să contracarăm, trebuie să recunoaștem, metodele foarte bine puse la punct de atragere a oamenilor pentru radicalizare, pentru violență, instigare și așa mai departe. Dacă aveți un program concret. Mulțumesc.
And finally on this session, Mrs. Dati, the rapporteur, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Moi, je souhaitais intervenir pour être en soutien de l'intervention de mon collègue Gérard Després, avec lequel, qui est effectivement très au fait et très pointu sur ces sujets. Moi, je tiens à vous le dire comme je le pense, je suis très choquée par l'intervention de l'ONG la Quadrature du Net. D'ailleurs, j'ai été choquée bien avant, puisque lorsqu'on travaillait sur ce rapport, il y avait des mails demandant aux parlementaires de ne surtout pas appuyer ni mon rapport et encore moins les mesures qu'on préconisait. La radicalisation, on a l'impression que vous ne savez pas ce que c'est. Ce n'est pas une histoire de censure. Ce n'est pas un combat légitime ou pas. C'est une obligation, une responsabilité. Parce que dans ces cas-là, et ce n'est pas de faire du populisme ou de la démagogie que de vous demander d'aller voir les victimes de cette barbarie, de voir les profils de ces individus radicalisés. J'en ai rencontré, je peux vous dire que c'est très effrayant. Et les individus radicalisés qui ne sont pas encore passés à l'acte, pour les plus radicaux, d'entre eux, si je puis me permettre, ils passeront à l'acte à un moment ou à un autre. Et donc, ils passeront à l'acte à un moment ou à un autre, et souvent, dans la grande majorité des cas, ils se sont radicalisés par le net. Donc, vous ne pouvez pas mettre en balance aussi légèrement, pardon de vous le dire, vos observations face à cette barbarie. La suppression de contenus illicites, ça n'est pas de la censure, madame. C'est simplement de faire respecter les lois et protéger notre jeunesse. Comme l'a rappelé Gérard Després, et pour cause, j'ai été magistrat et je peux vous dire que, s'agissant de la lutte contre la pédophilie, de pouvoir, par le net, empêcher des pédophiles de passer à l'acte, ou en tout cas de découvrir des pédophiles qui avaient commis des actes pendant des années absolument inacceptables, heureusement que nous avons pu effectivement pénaliser ces contenus illicites. Et je crois savoir que sur les 235 000 comptes sur Twitter qui ont été supprimés, je ne crois pas qu'il y a eu d'erreur sur ces comptes, sur la fermeture de ces comptes. Il n'y a eu aucune erreur. Donc, curieusement, et je veux juste terminer par ça, et puisque la représentante de Google est là, mais ce n'est jamais au bon niveau, c'est comme pour la Commission ou la présidence du Conseil, ils ne sont jamais là quand il faut. Et après, ils viennent en disant, non, quand on leur pose des questions, ils disent non, mais on travaille, on avance sur le sujet. Simplement, comme par hasard, tous les géants du net ont commencé à s'engager sur le sujet, dès lors où on a mis dans la résolution la possibilité de la responsabilité pénale engagée des géants du net s'ils ne supprimaient pas les contenus illicites. Moi, je souhaitais à l'époque aller plus loin et demander que quand ils n'agissaient pas, qu'on puisse effectivement les attraire à une complicité si effectivement des actes terroristes ou en tous les cas de djihadisme étaient commis. Voilà, je vous remercie.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, it's okay. I'm going to say something about Quadrature. Is it about...
Very shortly, because I fully agree with the colleague Dati when she says that radicalization is terrible and we have to fight. But this is because for the time being, when mentioning the word radicalization, we think about terrorism and all the things that are going on. But the word itself can be used in very different meanings. So if we only say radicalization without saying concretely that we link it to terrorism, in the long run, it can be used for censorship and other things. That's why we have to be very careful how to create the picture of this.
I was just about to say, I mean, we invited Quadrature to Net to just give before you interrupted, thanks, to give that fundamental rights perspective and to simply say that Mrs. Dati is right, that the moment radicalisation is leading to violence, then the clear equation is made. But there's going to be some grey areas where radicalisation, of course, you know, we are all Democrats, we want some freedom of speech, and so that perspective we wanted to see. And of course, to defend you, we wanted to hear your response then to that fundamental question, where do you draw the line? So, and this is what is now being asked. So it will come to you in just 1 second, and if you don't mind, and if we can just do it in order. And, but I'm sure you've been asked this question before, where do you draw that line? So let me start with Brittany Smith. I'm really sorry to put all of you in this position, but we don't have much time because our members were on a stream of consciousness taking up to 5 minutes. But I know why, because this is a big issue for our members, as you can see. So it means that if you could go directly to the questions you were asked, rather than any wider points, please. You know, no Google adverts, yeah? I know you know, I thought we had jargon in the European Parliament, but Google, my goodness. Go for it, eh? So please, go straight to the questions. Thank you very much.
Sure. On the question about the added value of European scale, I might be misunderstanding, so please do find me after or send me and my colleagues an email so that we can clarify in person. But I think that our ability to work with European-level institutions is incredibly useful and incredibly important for us to build our network in member states and at the member state level. There's only so much that we can do on our own to identify new groups and to offer support to those groups, and so when we can do so in conjunction with Parliament and with the Commission. And the Commission actually has been extremely useful for us in identifying groups that we can train, bringing them together, offering a setting for us to do this work. It's been really useful expanding so that we can expand the work that we do into more languages, into more geographies, and I think that partnership has been incredibly useful. I think on the question around which foreign terrorists, we are, for better or worse, an American company. And so we use the United States State Department Foreign Terrorist Organization list as we are legally obliged to not do business with those organizations. So the question around whether or not we block or delete those accounts, we delete them. When they're notified to us, we check against that list and we delete those accounts at the entire Google level. So this doesn't mean that we just delete just your YouTube channel or just your Google Plus page. I know no one's using Google Plus, but that's a thing. But I mean to say that we delete your entire Google account, which is actually a quite severe measure. So that there's no Google product that you can use on a logged-in basis. And where there are gaps, we're happy to have an open dialogue with law enforcement authorities about that so that we fully understand the context, that we understand the concern, that we understand exactly what's happening, and can be as useful as possible. About whether we've talked a lot about extremism and terrorism today, but we also have policies that prohibit pornography, spam, hate speech, graphic content, violence. Any one of those could be its own hearing, so I'll be brief, but that's all also available online. I think maybe the final thing that I want to address is this idea that I know that maybe this is new activity for us, but I want to be reassuring that we have taken this incredibly seriously for a long time. As I said in my remarks, we've had a dedicated flag for terrorist material in particular since 2008. We've had flagging and removal in place since 2006. And so, I'm grateful for the enhanced cooperation over these past several years. But I do want to be reassuring that we've taken this seriously for a very long time, and we look forward to expanding that work together, since this threat hasn't gone away and that it won't go away anytime soon, and that we do need to evolve in our response, and that our response needs to constantly be top of mind. And so I can assure you that that is the case, that we look forward to working with people on this panel, with yourselves, to make sure that the way that we are responding is attuned to what you are hearing in member states and here at the European level. And then please don't hesitate to be in touch with me directly with any follow-up questions in addition to this.
Thank you very much. And I think we would like to maintain a very strong contact because it's an evolving situation with a major provider. So I think that would be very helpful. Thank you again for being here. Now we have Stefan de Guan. Again, a specific question. Stefan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Concerning the first question about the grassroots and how actions is going into coordinated action with the fighting with the grassroots of the problem, may I remind the objectives of the EU Internet Forum, because it was mentioned several times. So we are participating to the forum, and this forum has two objectives, which are reducing the accessibility of online content and then empowering the civil society into producing alternative narrative. and the EU Internet Referral Unit has his role into this forum. Concerning the scale question that you asked, it's a tricky one because there's so many platforms, so many contents, and I mean, by itself, the Internet is borderless. So trying to assess the scale of something that has no border is quite tricky. So we put priority on our actions from the operational case of the member states. There's some operational cases in the states that we are supposed to support in terms of technical and tactical analysis. We scale our support with the capacity that we have in terms of language skills. What we created within the unit is skills to cover content in their original language production, so being Arabic, Turkish, or Russian. And we focus on the content that are produced next to an attack. There was a huge wave of attack last year, so the idea was to try to counter content that was produced to claim or to praise a very recent attack. So already it's about focusing your activity in order not to be drowning into the scale. Also, an example of this weekend, we focused our activity on new releases that are threatening specifically the EU. For example, 2 videos this weekend in French, where it was calling for lone actors attack and also providing hands-on information on how to make explosives. So such a video that are aimed to French community, giving them a hint on how to conduct attack, that's the kind of content that we're targeting. So we always start with the content, and then we look into the network that is evolving around the content, so people that are really creating accounts or moving accounts in order to publicize this type of contents. So that's how we cope with the scale.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And Adrian Charmé, again, I mean, please not too long, but just try and focus on the question from Mr. Dupré and Mr. Dati, because, to be honest, those are very common questions, particularly in this very reactive climate, where you have emergency measures in more than one member state. So, you know, please try and address that and the worries around it, please. Thanks.
Ok, je vais aller vite, effectivement. Bon, regretter déjà qu'on soit obligé de redire qu'on est opposé au terrorisme, ça me semble évident. On voudrait tout autant que tout le monde ici que cela cesse. Et rappeler aussi l'importance de se dire que défendre les droits fondamentaux des Européens dans le contexte actuel ne devrait pas être vu comme quelque chose de choquant ou quelque chose de léger. Je suis tout aussi choquée que Madame Dati, mais dans l'autre sens, en disant que défendre les droits fondamentaux ne peut pas être vu comme quelque chose d'inutile. L'obligation d'action, elle va dans tous les sens, pour tous les acteurs. Pour la Quadrature du Net, en tant qu'association de défense des droits fondamentaux qui a une expertise et une spécialité sur les questions numériques, notre contribution à ce combat de tous, c'est notamment éviter que des lois inutiles et potentiellement dangereuses dans l'avenir soient votées, que des pas soient franchis dans un certain nombre d'atteintes aux droits. Ça nous semble être notre contribution à ce travail général qui doit être fait. Je ne vais pas parler de comment lutter contre la radicalisation, ça n'est pas mon métier, ça n'est pas mon expertise. En revanche, les lois inutiles et les lois dangereuses, oui. Le parallèle entre l'apologie du terrorisme et la pédopornographie est très intéressant, parce qu'effectivement, dans le chemin que prennent ce type de lois, on a plusieurs fois vu des lois d'abord votées à propos de la pédopornographie qui sont étendues au terrorisme et qui ensuite sont souvent étendues à d'autres sujets. Je crois qu'il faut faire attention à la question des publics et de l'échelle. Ce ne sont pas les mêmes publics, ce n'est pas la même échelle, ce ne sont pas les mêmes moyens qui sont employés. Malheureusement, pour la pédopornographie, on a assez peu de doutes sur l'illégalité d'un contenu. Quand on parle d'apologie du terrorisme, on est sur des choses beaucoup moins claires juridiquement. Je passe à la question des blocages de comptes sur Twitter et des multiples blocages de comptes. J'ai dit dans ma présentation qu'il nous semblait qu'une adaptation de la réponse judiciaire était nécessaire pour effectivement, on ne va pas avoir 230 000 décisions de justice. En revanche, il y a bien eu de nombreuses erreurs et on peut notamment travailler sur ce qui a été dit sur la duplication de comptes, sur des contenus similaires, ce que vous disiez tout de suite. Si on a 15 fois la même vidéo qui qui est partagé par 15 comptes différents, la qualification juridique doit être plus facile. Pour parler des erreurs, par exemple, en France, on a un des plus fameux journalistes spécialistes du djihadisme qui s'est fait bloquer plusieurs fois son compte sur Facebook jusqu'à provoquer une réaction de Reporters sans frontières, avec quasiment aucun recours. Je termine avec deux choses. Sur la question des victimes et d'une naïveté de notre part. Nous travaillons au quotidien pour travailler sur nos réponses avec des experts sur les questions de terrorisme et de radicalisation, mais on a aussi travaillé avec notamment l'Association française des victimes de terrorisme, qui était elle-même contre le blocage de sites Internet en 2014 lors du vote en France de cette loi, estimant que c'était non seulement inutile, mais pénalisant pour le reste de la société de mettre en place ce type de mesures, de l'étendre. De la même façon, les spécialistes du terrorisme disent assez régulièrement à quel point il est inutile de travailler sur des blocages de sites ou que la manière qui est prise actuellement de travailler sur la radicalisation n'est pas la bonne. Ce qu'on voudrait, c'est penser sur le long terme. Je renvoie à ce que disait la personne de RAN, travailler sur les causes profondes, comme disait Madame Gomez, éviter les réponses à court terme, éviter les mauvaises réponses, et se rappeler que Internet et les contenus qui sont sur Internet, c'est le chemin de radicalisation. En revanche, les causes de la radicalisation, elles sont probablement beaucoup plus profondes, et je pense que là-dessus, on aurait tous besoin de travailler sans estimer que défendre notre modèle de société est quelque chose de dangereux. Merci.
Okay, thank you. Now, Alexander Ritzman, specifically the questions put to you, please.
There were several questions.
But
Yes.
Please be brief.
Ms. Gomez, regarding the role of families. Families can be key in prevention of radicalization, de-radicalization. Sometimes they're part of the cause, of course. So individual perspectives are key, but I support your approach, and there are great networks that focus on the work of mothers, on sisters and brothers, families, everything. The role of local governments in particular, they should not be involved in the messaging. They should not be involved in what the content of the message should be, and they surely should not be the messengers. Credibility is key. If we want someone who is looking for extremist content, you don't want to have a government spokesperson telling him that he's on the wrong path. That person probably knows that and is still interested. So there are some bad lessons learned from endeavors in the US, having the government too much involved in this kind of work that should be looked at. The size of the problem, I actually don't have a problem with the size. I have a problem with the growing speed of the size. We have an ongoing polarization. The right wing is increasing in support, in violence. As a reaction, we have on the left that was very weak and disorganized, some more strength, some more orientation because of the right is getting stronger. We have the Salafists who pick up, who become more active. Interestingly, the right wing tells its groups and its audience that the Muslims are going to take over society, while the Salafists tell their followers that the society is pushing them out and that they might have to leave. So everybody has their specific narrative, and they feed off each other. The circle of radicalization is a key concern. It's not just one group. It's how they foster each other and feed off each other that is going to increase the problem here. Ms. Sippel highlighted the general prevention parts in schools, civic education. Absolutely, I mentioned the handbook from teachers for teachers. Teachers face very difficult situations in schools. Sometimes they receive help. Sometimes this help is not very practical. Much more needs to be done in the field of general prevention. Mr. Deprez highlighted on others, this was obviously currently the discussion, the challenge balancing liberty and security. There are technical solutions who take away some of the problem here by not going after the account but only after the content, meaning there's an algorithm, it's called eGlyph, for example, by the Counter-Extremism Project, that only goes after videos or pictures that have been agreed on as being extremely violent. So once you have a committee that includes civil liberty activists, governments, civil society, focus on the 1% that is the worst of the worst and that is being reposted and reshared and redistributed, there are technical solutions to take this extreme contents off the web immediately. So it's not about the gray area, it's about the really dark and black area. So I would draw attention to the technical opportunities, for example, eClif from the Counter-Extremism Project.
Thank you very much. That was really excellent. I want to thank all the speakers, the high quality of the presentations, Google, the referral unit, Ms. Sharmi and Alexander as well. And I'm glad we've been joined by more members because I think the quality of the panel really demands a really bigger audience. So I want to now, we're running a little bit late, so I want to immediately change the panel if we can, with thanks to the speakers. Thank you very much. And as we change the panel, colleagues, I'm just going to introduce the speakers to save a little time. So we, a big part of Mrs. Dati's report, of course, was on the question of countering radicalisation in prisons and in the judicial system. And the first guest just sit anywhere and then the label will be changed. Okay, they'll change the label, please. As the speakers are settled down, I'm going to introduce our first speaker in the panel, is Iona van Nieuwkerk, who is representing Eurojust. And it's going to be interesting to hear from her what national experiences and best practices Eurojust has collected in countering radicalisation in our judicial system. So first we focus on the judicial system. And if, sadly, if some colleagues who are leaving, please do so quietly. I'd appreciate it. Thank you. You're okay to start, Ms. Newkirk? So please go ahead. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting Eurojust at this important discussion. And I'm happy to share with all of you the experience of Eurojust.
I think our guests are chatting, I'm sorry, and phones are going off, but I think it's Mr. Dupre's phone. Not usually this chaotic, so to our guests, but please, please start again. I'm so sorry. Please go ahead, Ms. Newkirk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the invitation to have Eurojust at the table and discuss the judicial dimension, the role of judiciary in countering radicalisation, violent extremism, recruitment for terrorism. Eurojust has been recognized its role, its added value in the Parliament resolution, and we are grateful for that. The Parliament resolution underlines the importance of increased judicial cooperation between all the member states and with Eurojust, and also highlighted how crucial the exchange of information at judicial level is in the fight against terrorism and radicalisation. We are grateful for a call for a strengthened mandate and resources for Eurojust and for the support of the Parliament to reinforce the capacity of Eurojust for the next year. As our casework is increasing considerably, we have 54 cases of terrorists referred by the Member States only this year as compared to only 14 in 2014. And these numbers do not show the complexity of the terrorist cases which are referred to us, the legal and practical issues which are encountered by the national authorities, and Eurojust is helping them to speed up, to accelerate coordination, judicial cooperation, to solve issues in ongoing investigations, search warrants, execution, prevention of conflicts of jurisdictions, legal problems, joint actions day, which are coordinated by Eurojust coordination centers, which are also mentioned in the Parliament resolution. So this reinforcement is timely and is very much needed. As regards to the exchange of information at judicial level, most probably you are aware that prosecutions and convictions for terrorist offences, or any links between cases, European arrest warrant. In 2014, only 30 such information on prosecutions, for example, while and this goes for the convictions number. So we have the overview at Eurojust at what happens in the investigation and prosecutions, and in the convictions, what are courts deciding, what are the sentencing levels. 2015, the Council tasked Eurojust to look even deeper at the sentencing practices of the member states in such cases. Are programs of de-radicalization, rehabilitation in terrorist cases imposed? And if yes, do they work? And in this way, you're looking at the convictions, and we've seen that recently there are alternatives to imprisonment imposed more and more by the courts, or suspended sentences. But the court, even in writing, in the court decision, specifies the exact program. The court specifies exactly what is the aim of this program, and not only to change violent behavior, but we see that the court says we want this program to address religious or attitudes, beliefs, concepts. So we were looking into this. We for terrorist matters for Eurojust. They have been appointed more than 10 years ago in all the member states. They are prosecutors, judges specialized in terrorism, dealing with complex terrorist cases in the member states. They gather at Eurojust operation on best practice, on what problems, what legal challenges exist, the trends in terrorism. And since to discuss, first of all, the legal concept, what is de-radicalization? Can a program of de-radicalization be imposed? Does the legislation allow it? We see that in some member states, because it's not a legal concept, you will not see a court decision saying this is a program of de-radicalization. And it's also important to define it, to see what would be the difference between radicalization and disengagement. For example. We also look whether the legislation permits alternatives to imprisonment proceedings. Can a prosecutor, a judge, decide to apply such measure aiming at the radicalization? Can we divert a suspect from prosecution? And if yes, under which condition? Will the radicalization be foreign terrorist fighters has been interpreted differently in different member states, leading to convictions in some courts, and how to differentiate between offenders, because the judicial authorities need to take a decision based not only on the crime committed, but also on the dangerousness, the risk, the threat posed by different offenders. And there are developments we see in the member states to see low-risk, medium, and high-risk offenders. And we see that analyzing the risk, the most successful to be in this area is to have close cooperation between intelligence, police, also, the intention of Eurojust to closely cooperate with the European Counter-Terrorist Center at Europol. This is also one of the requirements of the Agenda on Security, so we are now exploring at Eurojust what steps are needed to have a bridge with the European Counter-Terrorist Center. We are also pleased to see that the discussion on the returnees, which will take place in the Council, shows the role of Eurojust in this area. And here my presentation, and I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I hope there will be questions, because I think this foreign fighter, from acquittal through to exemplary sentencing, I think is a very big issue. So thank you for your analysis. And we go straight to Stefan Nielsen. Many colleagues will have heard of the so-called Aarhus project. It's very well known now from the city of Aarhus in Denmark. And Stefan Nielsen works for the East Jutland, Jutland. I said Jutland as the British say it, sorry. The East Jutland Police, and this is a de-radicalisation.
Yes, thank you for inviting us. We're sort of we work at street level here. When we started out in 2007 and got the job from the National Police of preventing radicalization, we could use all the systems that we had, all the legislation that we have, all the possibilities of exchange of information in multi-agency settings that we could in the existing crime prevention. We didn't have to invent anything new. An example or an idea of the size. Can we change the slide? Here, the size of what we're talking about. We have a population of 30,000, and Aarhus is the second largest city in Denmark, and we have the biggest deprived area located here with about 10,000 people. Next slide, please. The experiences is built on approximately 400 reports in the last 4 years. If we go back to 2007, we have around 600 reports all in all. Primarily Islamist and right-wing radicalization, only 2 instances of left-wing. We have sort of eradicated the right-wing radicalization, or at least most cases have been dealt with through counseling. It's very much as a center of experts counseling the counselors, so we're using the existing social service system and police system as the main tools of doing an early prevention here. 28 persons have so far been attached to the mentoring program, which we, by the way, tested for Erasmus funds at the end of eight or 9, I think, and it's now our usual practice now. And now 9 persons are currently being mentored. Next slide, please. This has been reported killed or have been reported killed. 18 returned and 10 are still in Syria, Iraq, presumably. Danish citizens with very much faced with a new challenge that's growing, or not a new challenge, but a growing challenge now that ISIS is on the retreat, that more and more people, a few months ago there were 12 people still in Syria and 6 reported killed, and now we have more and more people killed, so we have to deal with the families and the mothers and grief support and grief counseling, both in terms of social service obligations, but also in preventing radicalization among the families, the brothers and the sisters. Yes, next, please. So the Aarhus model is all built on this prevention triangle, where most of the majority of the target group is self-sustaining, there's a minority that's in need of help, and there's a very small 1 to 5% part of the target group that needs special attention. The resistance against radicalization in the schools and in the education to get support and counseling in following our goal that we do public events and workshops, and we also do community outreach now. Yes, click please. The Info House receives the information and passes on the information and can refer to mentoring, to family networks, meetings and risk assessments there, and they can also refer to, click please, the Syrian contingency and the exit program. We assess there is, the more we work with disengagement, but with the hardcore guys, we take the same approach as we do with exit from organized crime. This is de-radicalization. You have to be either or. Yes, click please. And then we have all the external collaboration with national hotline, all the online radicalization efforts that's done, and we're very much trying to be part of it ourselves, but still our experience is that radicalization, the online platforms are instruments there, not necessarily the causes. And we work very much with radicalization families. We had a few cases with Aarhus University to get as much knowledge as we can with the intelligence service, PET is the Danish intelligence service, and with Copenhagen. In practicality, when we're talking about the work on the street, is that the Info House is the hub where we do the screening, the visitation, the resources, youth clubs, NGOs, street workers, families, network, and we had, when we had to stop in our efforts to stop the flow of people joining the Syrian Consular Network, of people who are related to people who had left for Syria. And that network actually empowered the parents to go to jihad. That was a side effect we didn't counter, we didn't factor in, we didn't expect it. We were only trying to help these people. And there's a steering group of police commissioner and 2 municipal directors. We can refer to interventions, counseling, mentoring, and Center for PTSD and Transcultural Psychiatry, whatever that is. The police can't do it by themselves, the social service can't do it by themselves. All have different qualities. The police excels in risk assessment, in the danger of people, and the social services excel in what they do in the re-include people. It also has to be very flexible. You have to be able to both handle people who are at risk of radicalization, whether they want it or not. This is all on voluntary basis. There's and you also have, we see ourselves as ones in surveillance with the intelligence service, the intelligence pursuing and deterring, which is police districts, and then we have the prevention, click please, where this is police, national and local authorities, civil societies. It's not, we've been criticized a lot at home and at an also on an international basis for being an alternative to punishment and pursuing. But we don't see ourselves as that. We see ourselves as a third necessarily.
I've heard of this project, you know this project, so Thank you very much indeed. And I just take the opportunity to thank the members who are here, who have actually waited until this hour, because I think the quality of presentations earlier and now are of the highest quality. So I would like to thank you for staying and conclude at the end. So we're just going to have one final speaker to listen to, and that's going to be Robert Dorrell, again from RAN, another more senior member of RAN Network, and you're going to talk about how people are removed from radicalised, violent mindsets towards mainstream society. So you're very welcome. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this. It's a pleasure to be here to meet you. My name is Robert Dorrell. I'm a practitioner working on to leave violent extremism. I've been working for about 13 years with an NGO called Exit Sweden, who supports people who want to leave neo-Nazi groups and organized criminal gangs. I'm here to present the work with RAN, a RAN Exit working group, more specifically. The aim of the RAN Exit is to find practitioners because it means that this is practitioners who want to engage with violent extremists. And this has been sweeping Europe by having meetings in a handful of member states, inviting practitioners from almost all member states to listen to their practices and their recommendations or their challenges. And what is key elements in exit work. Some of the trends and challenges when it comes to the societal level, because this is also where it needs to be linked. So how interested is society in actually helping people to come back from violent extremist groups? And this is usually violent far-right extremists or violent Islamic extremists, and in some cases violent left-wing extremism. This is really a challenge. There was mentioning earlier the trend those individuals and how to assess motivation for actually changing or not changing. There is a great demand of both quantity. There needs to be more people who actually works with interventions, working face-to-face with individuals in these groups. But there also is a very strict requirement for quality in this. If you don't know what you're doing, it might be look more on outcomes. I really urge for evaluations and academia to look more on these type of programs. So this is the trends and challenges that we see within the RAN Exit since the last couple of years, sweeping practitioners in Europe. Next slide, please. So let me go through some basic principles that we see when it comes to exit work. And this seems to be generalized throughout practitioners in the EU. One of them is that even though there's different ideologies, it seems to be very similar type of pathways when it comes to entering these groups and also what type of support you would need when you leave. So violent extremists are in conflict with society. They don't like society. They don't trust society, government, different authorities. So the challenge is then to link up with they need help from that they don't trust. One of the other key aspects is ownership of the process. So for this to be, so you can't put somebody on an A to Z packing list and hope that they will turn out good in the end, but you have to really engage them and have them motivated to make these changes, to go through these steps, and to also actively take part in it. Key people's perspectives. My colleague Alexander was in on it earlier about credibility, which is also very linked to trust. If you want to create trust, a clear analysis of what type of situation do we have, what type of cases that we have in front of us. It would be very different for somebody who's young and just entered. Of this person. Next slide, please. There's a very strict need for confidentiality. So violent extremism trust people who should help them to leave. So there needs to be a very clear work on confidentiality. Not leaking information about who's in the program, not exposing them to media if they don't want this themselves, branch if information comes out or not. And this leads to making a safe environment where journey. It's a very different type of attitudes and atmosphere in society than in these groups. So of the exit worker, so what type of workers do we have in exit type of work? Well, usually we have two categories, which is professionally trained therapists and extremism came out well on the other side and can use their experience in a constructive way to help others. 4 slide, please. So also coming back to one of the earlier discussions or questions from previous panels. So what type of and counter this and tell them that they're wrong and overprove them? Well, usually not. Usually this doesn't lead directly to criticism with a repertoire that you've been taught in these environments. So key element is to work on personal issues, looking at who is this person in front of us and what type of situation is he or she in, and how can we strengthen the sides and elements of the personality and personal issues. Friends, families, communities, I see time is key to involve. We heard earlier about family support, which is as essential if we don't want also family members to be radicalized. But also thinking of society, I think this comes back to one of the key points. It also comes back to us. What type of society? How do we want to help people from these groups? Are we willing to let people back, and how do we do that? Next slide, please. 9. NGO, civil society organizations is key actors when it comes to exit work with people in these environments. And then next slide for 2 seconds, and then I'm off. But NGO, civil society signals, but also for fundings, for cooperation, and for contacts into different type of authorities in societies in the member states. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all three and for your work. Any questions? Anna Gomez.
Eurojust representative Ms. Neukirk, ask about prisons and the work. There's been an effort to, for instance, check imams and actually make sure that imams trained in Europe with the European approach background are actually the ones in contact the people who are in prison? Or are we actually allowing, I'm told that most member states allow imams to come from places like the other question, I'm very grateful for what the other speakers have said, but I wonder how many cities like have the capacity in terms of all the expertise and the strategic sense, but the funding to implement such a program. Because that's when austerity makes a hell of a difference.
Good questions. Mr. Becker, please.
Thank you, Herr Vorsitzender. Thank you, Chair, and I go ahead in English. And knowing that you will not tell me which of our member states fail in this cooperation, I turn the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just a quick question to Mrs. Van Nieuwkerk. You know why? You know why that may be? Eurojust is really interesting because how you deal with, and this is my question, quick one, how you deal, so, you know, this is a national competence. However, you have a cross-border situation here. You're going through a number of countries. You have good and they want to go to Aleppo or whatever. A very quick question is, are you giving any Are you leaving it to the member states? Is there any cross-border competence or even good practice issue for Eurojust? Because I actually think it is working in Aleppo through to the extremely dangerous individuals who are sleeping in our cities and who could kill people. And I think that is an extraordinary situation that we're in at the moment. So, you know, what does Eurojust do about that? I mean, I don't like a long answer, but if it's you're going to keep but, you know, we shouldn't be led astray. I mean, we should know kind of thing, you know.
I will start with the first question regarding the prisons. Yes, we at Eurojust, we discuss also this idea of how to work in prison, and we know that there are imams involved in some member states. Unfortunately, I do not have detailed information or about where exactly they come from, but I could go back to our national authorities and I could ask this question, and we can come back to you, added value. As regard to the second question, about the cooperation between all, to say that this works or doesn't work in specific member states, what Eurojust does is to underline the importance of is essential, otherwise the information is incomplete. Our pictures is not, our fight can be only multidisciplinary, so we will have to work in. To the chair question, yes, it's a complex question. With complicated answers. Like you said, each case is analyzed upon its merits, and we at Eurojust, we make sure that when our arrest warrant has to be executed in another member state, we can speed up this. When joint Eurojust can coordinate such actions and can help achieving progress. There are many cases where progress has could not be achieved without Eurojust support. It's true, it is very complex. That's why I mentioned this network of says in repeated occasions, we need such networks to fight the criminal networks. So by exchanging such practice, by facilitating such exchanges, prosecutors from member states can learn what kind of arguments, what kind of problems exist in specific cases. There are different cases, not only foreign fighters, but recruitment networks, how to prove that an organization is a terrorist organization, is a recruitment network. And by facilitating these best practices and challenges, we assist member states, and they would learn from each other. Thank you.
Very much. And Stefan Nielsen, Anna Gomez asks, Probably not. And
well, we shouldn't say so, because actually the Danish government is trying to take our model and nationalize it, sort of spreading it out to all the police districts and all the municipalities at different levels according to what is needed in that municipality and that police district, because the problem is not the same everywhere. But it is becoming a national model, so the Danish and the intelligence service probably very much like me to say that the Aarhus model is a Danish model, but it's in the process of becoming that. There was a question of euros. We were just given some additional funding, so we were maybe on €1 million, which is in a huge social service setting as the Danish setting is actually peanuts. So it's done perspectively. It's a very
very complex and intricate area of radicalisation, covering so many disparate areas. But we now have a so-called security union issue where we can at least try and get some cohesion. So so-called security union and try and piece together some of these issues. So with that introduction, thank him for being here and maybe to make some... Yeah. So it's Giles de Kerkhoff, the EU Counter-Terrorism Coordinator.
That's fine. Thanks a lot.
Yes, okay. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'll be short because it's quite late, and I just want to commend first you and your commission to the committee to have first put this issue on the agenda and the excellent speakers that you invited. I thought indeed, as you said, that the discussion were extremely interesting, and you selected the right topics, both internet, and I would say more than just prison. The issue of rehabilitation as a whole. Internet, no need to dwell on that. We know that that's good news, the collapse of the physical caliphate. We will still be confronted with the virtual caliphate. And we know that Daesh will keep trying to inspire, a guy called Rashid Kassim in France who was using internet, telegram, encrypted messages to indicate the target and the way to proceed. Maybe mention 3 points. The first is an overall assessment of what we do in the EU. The second is some comments on what was discussed, and some, the third point, some challenges. On what the EU does, I've been now in this position for more than 9 years. Frankly, I'm impressed. How much we've improved our policy response. Of course, it's not enough. Of course, we need to invest even more, and member states as well. And that was, I think, in 2004. That was just guesstimation. We just drafted something based on what we thought was relevant. Now we have €1 million to a major program on Prevent, both to advise the government, and we have people on the ground trying to understand the Jordan, and it's very difficult to understand. And then we support NGOs on the ground, grassroots, to find solutions. And thanks to the excellence of the expert that Ran sent there. I think the communication that the Commission issued in June, the Commission has started mainstreaming counterviolent extremism in other policies, what I call CVE relevant policies: education, youth, sport, culture, and access to employment. And so it's, for me, a very good move. Citizens and the like and the like. And that is a very good start. For instance, the Commission took one initiative which I was pushing a lot based on in a first phase, European with 200,000 Arabs and have joined courses on internet. We have new tools. I don't enter into that. Many of them were mentioned. The RAND network. The second one is, I think, we are pragmatic. In the first phase, we were trying to understand the profile, the drivers, and so on the tree. Probably one, not enough, and I'll come to that. So that's my first point. The second point on the more, as what many of you said. On Internet, and I fully share what Gérard Deprez said and Mr. Lopez Aguilar, the IT forum is the EU as a whole can have. And to cover the wide range of issues is not only radicalisation online, but it's digital evidence. And I need to work on encryption. It's a very tricky issue, but it's only an issue we will solve if we have an engagement with the intel company at high level. Should be even improved. So far, the flagging system, and I understand what was said on the need to preserve free speech by la Quadrature du Net. But I, among those who believe that the Internet company should remove a lot more from that platform. Of course, the Internet Referral Unit of Europol is pretty effective. 17,000 sites have been removed with a strike rate of 87%, as I understand. But let's be honest, it's a drop in the ocean. It's only, I think, when and address the problem. Someone mentioned an excellent initiative called eGlyph, which was developed for pedopornography, by which you give a digital signature to a content, and if this one has already been removed, it will then be urge the companies to move to an automated way to remove unlawful content. On the positive side, the counter-narrative, yes, we need to do more, yet enough. And that's why I would like to see the Internet companies matching EU money with their own resource, and why not setting up a foundation to a more neutral actor to encourage them to challenge the rhetoric of Daesh, Al-Qaeda, and the like. So that's on the internet. On prison, Commissioner Jourova really did a lot of work. She organized 2 meetings with the Minister of Justice. Especially on this issue of radicalisation in prison, he tried to rearrange the financing program for justice to, as was said by Julian Keeners, and develop a risk assessment methodology, because we need to learn or not. I think not the 6.5 million have been exhausted, which is a bit disappointing. So I'm myself trying my best to encourage on how to deal in the context of a many times myself, and it's not an easy statement, encourage our member states not to rush for the criminal track and not to rush for prison. We know with no blood on the hands, to undertake a rehabilitation program, let's encourage this to the maximum possible. But that requires that we have a rehabilitation program ready. So I turn to my piece. I finalized today, and I will present to Minister of Interior on the 8th of December, or the 9th of December, a sort of policy paper on how to address the issue of returnees. I won't, of course, enter into this, it's too late, and not raise the issue of the need to improve information sharing, the need to collect better evidence in the region, especially the work we do in Iraq. To start with Turkey, Jordan and Lebanon. But there are 2 issues where there is a need to do much more, is rehabilitation and how to in Germany, in Britain, but let's be honest, member states need to rush to have more effective rehabilitation programs, not very advanced in our thought on how to handle people who have spent 1, 2, 3 years member states even consider that a child above 9 years old could be considered already as a fetus. How do we deal with that? I know I have to come to an end. We know how much how many there are in Germany. 3, of course, I don't open that box, but I want to mention that because I see a role for the committee could explore how we can work more on the subject, and finally support more third countries. The UN Secretary strategy on how to prevent violent extremism, and the EU, and we've started that, Mrs. Mogherini and the European External Service, to support the effort of the country around the Mediterranean to have a smart PV program. We will start, we are already helping the Tunisian. I will be myself in Lebanon early 2017. This is something we can
I was just drawing a conclusion there because I know the speakers have to leave, so I just wanted to thank them. I didn't want them to be walking out in the middle of your contribution. Can I just say, I mean, again, the excellence of your contribution, the fact that you stayed and listened to our contributions, informing, as you do, the Council and your approach is very much appreciated, and I just want to convey that from the Parliament. Also, I want to thank the members who stayed right to the end, in this case Thomas, Mr Becker and Ana Gomez, who I think may have waited for 6 hours, did 6 hours of committee today. This is not unappreciated, Anna. Thank you very much. And thank you to all colleagues who have stayed until 6 o'clock. Mr Kirkhope, thank you again for the work you're doing in Council as the anti-terrorism coordinator. It's greatly appreciated, and we want to keep the connections very close as we start to define this again for the excellence of their contributions, and indeed this afternoon. And thank you again, colleagues, on behalf of the rapporteur. If you could convey, Ambassador, I don't think it's going to be fair to make members wait until the Ambassador comes, but he was scheduled for much later, but I will convey our apologies to the Ambassador, who was going to make some comments. Deputy Ambassador. Thank you very much, colleagues. The meeting is ended.